Let's put our hands together to welcome Dr. Wann Fanwar for our third session. And then we have a tea break, and then after that we have our fourth session.
And God said to Moses, say to the Israelites, you shall be holy, for I, Yahweh, your God, am holy. Okay, that was not part of my speech. In this first session, before we get into some of the nitty-gritty laws of Leviticus, we will look at that one big topic. Yesterday I told you that the governing word of the book is the word holy. And the governing concept of the book is that God is holy, and therefore his people must be holy. And we got some previews into what that means, and some of the ways by which God makes that possible. But today we kind of need to pull some of those ideas together to see that bigger picture about holiness. So what we're going to do in this first session, third session, is to talk about holiness theology arising from the book of Leviticus. Be holy, God says, because he is holy. So be like me, what God is saying. We find that in Leviticus 19. We find a longer expression of it in Leviticus 11. At the end of the chapter, God says, I am Yahweh your God, so you will make yourselves holy, and be holy because I am holy. For I am Yahweh who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God, so you will be holy once because I am holy, so that you will be like me. When God first created humans, Genesis 1, 26, 27, 28, his intention was this. And the Lord God said, let us make man in our image. In our likeness, let us make them. So being God-like has always been the intention of God. And then sin came into the picture. Everything went haywire. The electrical circuit got short-circuited. The wiring lost its insulation. The grounding disappeared, and before you know it, the current was running wild through your home. So God has to come around and fix all of that, so that we can again be in that image of God. So when you put Genesis and Leviticus together, what God is really saying, he wants to restore that original intention that came with creation. So that Israel, God's people, us, the church, will look like him. Now, have you ever had this expression? Somebody tells you, oh, you look just like your father. Or you look just like your mom. Now, I've learned that millennial kids don't really like being told this. How many millennials are here in this room right now? You know the definition of millennial. Anybody born after 1980 is millennial. Yes, there's quite a few of you. I know. I just have to look at your faces. The rest of us were pre-millennials. That means Stone Age, okay? Millennials take great pride in their individuality. I am me. But science says that you are not you. You are simply a blend of genes from your mother and your father for many generations back. What's even worse is somebody telling you, you know, I knew your grandma, you look just like her, really? She's 100 years old, what are you saying, I look 100 years old? But this is what God is saying, I want you to look just like me. You can take that at a very facile level and say it's a physical thing, or you can take it at a very spiritual level and say that's the kind of people God expects. But here's the problem, sin is still on the way. For all of this desire and all of this intention of God, sin doesn't run away. Satan doesn't give up. If you don't believe, read Revelation. Even after Jesus comes back with all the saints from heaven in the New Jerusalem, he tries. He tries again. He's always trying. He picks on the very best. Maybe a high priest like Joshua. He picks on the disciples of Jesus. One of my favorite disciples of Jesus is Peter. And I like Peter because he has such a big mouth. This is a guy who would think 10 minutes after he spoke. And the last night Jesus was with his disciples. He tells them, tonight I'm going to be arrested, I'm going to be put to death, and you will all run away. What does Peter say? The man with the big mouth. The man with thought after, no, if all of them deny you, I will die with you. Few hours later, what was he saying? I don't know. You must know him. You are Galilean. You're one of... I don't know him. I can almost imagine he got a little vulgar in an attempt to prove he wasn't the disciples. And then amazingly, Jesus picks this man, looks at him, and he says, Peter, feed my sheep. You and I would never do something like that. See, that's what God does. Because God can take a rolling stone like Peter. By the way, the word Petros means a moving stone, a pebble. And God made a Petra, a rock, out of him. God says, on this rock, you can take that text, whatever, but he was talking to Peter. On this rock, I will build my church. And Christianity has known for the last 2,000 years that Peter was the first main leader of the church. You see, how does that happen? How does that transformation take place? Does it happen naturally? Does it happen because of effort? Does it happen because we try to be good? How many of you, being Christians, have really tried to be good? You all should be raising your hands. This is disappointing. A hopeless class. We all try to be good. In fact, those of us how many of you grew up in a Christian home like me? Okay, maybe not so many here. If you grew up in a Christian home, you probably heard that all your life. You're a Christian, we are Christians, show the right face, do the right things, and get it right. And sometimes, anybody else here is a pastor's kid, like me? Nobody else? I'm the only pastor's kid in this. You know what I mean by pastor's kid? Your father was a pastor? If that wasn't clear. Right? I'm not just a pastor. There's been generations of pastors in the Fanwar clan. But since this, in the next generation, there's nobody gone into ministry, it looks like it's kind of ended with me, or my generation. It's nice to be the last one. Because Jesus is the last shall be first, so I'll get in there before my dad. When you're a pastor's kid, the pressure is even worse. All pastors' kids are brats, but the world expects them to be angels. And some pastors' kids lose their way simply because of that pressure. It's just too much. Your father's a pastor, how come you said that? Your father's a pastor, why did you do that? And the kid has no freedom. He cannot move. Everything he says is analyzed. Everything he does is put through a microscope. And so we develop a false concept of holiness. We expect the pastor's kid to be holy because the pastor is holy. And then somewhere along the way we discover my pastor is human. Because he did something I didn't quite like. And before you know it, that poor pastor has become a demon. See, only God can make the transformations to eliminate all of these categories. I met a young pastor in Michigan. He and his wife had 5 kids. Oh, they really took the command of God seriously. And all 5 kids are church brats. I've never seen children so naughty in church. But you could never convince that young couple that their kids were not angels. But there was one good effect in the church. The young pastor and his wife, and he was a youth pastor, so he didn't, get in the pulpit that often. They'd come and they'd sit on the very last row. Oh, this was great, because everybody would migrate as far away from the family as he could. So it was an easy way to get the church to move to the front rows. Just put that pastor and his brats at the back. Everybody will move to the front. They don't want to be near these kids. We see them one way, the parents see them another way. There is a wonderful Christian song on YouTube. It's called Mended. Have any of you listened to the song? Are we in the same Christian world or something? I'm beginning to realize you and I live on different planets. No, I'm just kidding. It's a wonderful song by Matthew West. You should, when you get home tonight, or as soon as this session is over, or during the break, turn on your YouTube, find the song, just type Mended, you'll find it. The song is written from the view of God, how God sees us. And it says that you see yourself broken, but I see you mended. It's a beautiful song. Okay, and I think that every Christian should learn that song, should memorize. It's very contemporary, not the easiest song to sing. Okay? But the lyrics are fantastic. I think that Matthew West spent a lot of time writing that. God says you see yourself broken, you see yourself in pain, I see something else. So what is it that God is trying to accomplish in us? And how does he go about doing that? Okay, first of all, let's come to terms with holiness language in Leviticus. Because in English we only have the word holy, so it's sometimes a bit misleading. I'm going to teach you a little bit of Hebrew. I'm sorry for those of you who are not interested in Hebrew, okay? You cannot be in any of my classes without Hebrew and Greek, because the Bible was not written in English, regardless of what you think, okay? There's a story of a little old lady, you know, the people were arguing about Bible versions, and she said this: if the King James Bible was good enough for St. Paul, it's good enough for me. Sorry, King James and St. Paul are not the same time frame historically. Okay? The Hebrew language is built on a system of root. So when we try to learn Hebrew words, we look for the root and then the derivatives that come from that. The root is this: kadash. Okay? From which you get the verb itself, kadash, the noun, holiness, and then the most common form of it, the adjective, kadosh. And so in Isaiah 6:3, when the angels sang around the throne of God, they used the adjective, kadosh, 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 Ladonai. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. Okay? God is the only one who's described in that triple use of the word. And in Hebrew grammar, when you repeat a word 3 times, that's the hyper-superlative. It's like saying the most holiest. Now we cannot do that in English. So what do they do when they translate Isaiah 6:3? They just leave the 3 words, holy, holy, holy. But what it means is most holiest. This is higher than holy. And that expression is used only of God and only twice in the Bible. Can anybody tell me the second time that it is used? Revelation 4. Again, the angels singing about God. And what this tells us is this, that holiness is the prime attribute of God. If people ask you, what is God? He's holy. Somebody asked me if I'm really Indian or not, or what nationality I am. Well, I'm really not sure. I carry an Indian passport. I feel most comfortable in Thailand. I speak more than 1 language. I read a lot more than that. I'm not sure what I am. People tell me I don't look Indian. I definitely don't sound Indian. That's what they tell me. And I don't shake my head right. I have students right now who still don't believe I'm an Indian. You know? So I don't know. I was preaching in America, and after the sermon, the pastor came to me, "Where were you educated?" I said, "Why? You know, the way you speak English, you must have had your education in America." And I wanted to tell him, people in my country spoke English before America was even born. What are you talking about? You know? But I'm in his church, so you have to do the political thing. To be polite and smile. No, I've never studied in America. Are you sure you didn't study in America? He actually announced the church after my sermon. He said, "Don't you just love his quaint English?" And I'm like, "What's so quaint about my English?" Okay. We have all kinds of strange ways of describing life and ourselves. If I ask you, who are you right now? What would you say about yourself?
I'm a Chinese.
I'm a Chinese. I thought you would start with something more basic. I'm a man. Or I'm a woman. Or these days I'm a man-woman. Or whatever. I saw this picture of a triple wedding in Taipei, Taiwan. There were 3 couples in the wedding. One is an all-male couple, one is an all-female couple, and then there's a normal couple in the middle. And I was like, oh, wow. It's a court wedding, so 3 of them were before the judge. So there was the 2 men on the side, and the 2 women on the side, and the guy and the wife in the middle. So these days it's becoming hard to describe who we are, so we prefer maybe the racial stuff or the national stuff. I'm a Malaysian. But who are you really? Actually, you're just a collection of chemicals worth about $20. Do you know if you reduce all the chemicals in your body and you sell them, you'll get only about $20? Because most of your body is what? Most of your body is what? Water. There's actually all kinds of minerals in your body, including gold. Did you know this? Oh, Dr. Fanwar, are you making stuff up? No, I actually do a lot of research. But even if you take this micro amounts of gold and all the other magnesium, potassium, iron, and everything else in your body, you're only worth about $20. Many of us have very big heads. We think we are so important. The world cannot live without us. Imagine how God feels. You know the song we sang yesterday, Who Am I? That the Lord of all the earth should care to know my name, should care to feel my hurt. David was the first one to voice those thoughts. When I look at the heavens that you have made, the sun, the stars, what is man that you should care about him? And yet we saw yesterday that God cares so much about us that He's devoted everything for our sake. So God trying to make us holy is like God trying to make a part of Him, a part of His family. This word is, what it really means is something that is separated from the normal order or the natural realm. So God is exclusively holy because He is not worldly. He is otherworldly. He is the creator, not the creation. Humans, therefore, cannot make themselves holy because we are the creation. We are the created order. We are part of the world. We're part of matter and energy. So whatever we think about holiness, it's got to come from there. Look at this. 140 times this word is used in Leviticus. How many chapters in Leviticus? 27. Come on, do the maths. How many times, roughly, per chapter? Come on, we have some maths, some accountants, some teachers, some computer people. Approximately 5 times per chapter, isn't it? That is considered really high frequency when you understand that there are only 22,000 words in the Hebrew language. So in the book of Leviticus, this word is really high profile. I don't know how many of you have this experience. I don't like to drive a car very long. 5-6 years tops. Okay, so sooner or later I will change car. And every time I buy a new car, what do I see on the road? All the other cars that are like mine. So if I'm driving a Mazda 2, I only see Mazda 2s everywhere. Now it suddenly looks like, oh, Mazda 2s everywhere. Actually, it's not true. It's just what I see, my perception. Because I'm not looking for other things. So walking through Leviticus is like you're not looking for other things, you're looking for holy. The only other book with an almost equally high frequency of the word kadosh or kadash is Isaiah. And that tells you how important this word is to this book. Most of those instances is what we call implied holiness. Not necessarily explicitly stated. We'll come to that. Okay, so here it goes. God is holy. Okay, it's a unique attribute of Him. And yet God says that He wants to make us holy. So how does that happen? As an opening thought, whatever is associated with God, an object, space, time, person by default becomes holy. When God appeared to Moses in that burning bush, what did he say to Moses? Remove your, sorry, they didn't wear shoes in those days. Remove your sandals, because the ground on which you're standing is holy ground. What made that piece of desert holy? Because God was there. The moment God touched that piece of ground, it became holy. That ground is still the same material as the rest of the ground. It is still the same earth, still the same desert. But the presence of God changed its property. What made Israel holy? Make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among you. And the moment God descended on that sanctuary, the entire camp became holy by default. It's kind of like being born in a certain country and you become a citizen of that country, even though racially you may not be. Well, it doesn't happen in Asia, but it happens in many other countries. And so you have people who come from Africa, migrants, and their children are born in America and automatically become American citizens until President Trump came on the picture. This is the only way that we can become holy. How many of you are parents here? Come on, don't be ashamed. It's a wonderful profession. It's the oldest and the longest profession. It's a God-given profession. How many of you have perfect children? None. Come on, you can be a little more optimistic than that. At least one. Now, which of those children are yours? The good ones or the naughty ones? Both, isn't it? It's not what those children are, it's who you are. We are not holy because we are good and we have done all the right things, we have the right ethics. We are holy because of who our Father is. And God is definitely most holiest. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord. This is very important because everything else we might think about holiness fades behind this primary concept. Humans, time, space, material, all become holy only by association with God. So the tabernacle is holy. It's made up of plank and gold and wood. It's made up of skin and cloth. What made those things holy? The presence of God. The Levites and the priests were set out for certain tasks. What made them holier than the rest of Israel? Because of their association and their proximity to God. What made Moses' face shine with glory? Being in the presence of God. And so, we need to get over that hurdle to understand that we are holy by process. Paul calls it adoption. The moment we are adopted into the family of God, we are holy. It does not appear what we shall be, it's who we are. So let me come back to my first question yesterday. Are you holy?
Yes.
Not very convincing. Are you holy?
Yes.
That's much better. Now I think God has heard you. So only God is holy, but anything that He touches, anything that comes in contact with God, directly or indirectly, by word or physically, becomes holy. Whenever God enters the human sphere, everything and everyone He touches becomes holy. In other words, holiness is not innate to humans, it is derived from God. You and I are not naturally holy. What is our natural state? We are sinners. We are human. Well, let's be kinder on ourselves. We are human. But the moment we are attached to God, we become holy. So holiness begins first by the establishment of a relational connection with God, not through some moral action. Those moral actions may ensue, but it doesn't start that way. How did you become Malaysians? Most of you are Malaysians here. Anybody is not a Malaysian? I mean, apart from me? Okay. How did you become a Malaysian? Because you were born in this country. If you were born in Hong Kong, what would you be? Honky. Yes. By the way, you don't use that term when you are actually in Hong Kong. They really don't like it. No, I look like a lot of people in Southeast Asia, right? And people mistake me. In Thai, they think I'm local. In Malaysia, they think I'm local. People here tend to speak to me in Bahasa, especially if I wear batik, you know. I went to Bali, had the same problem there. I go to Indonesia, they talk to me in Tagalog. It's nice to have my face. Okay. But I'm Indian, even if your eyes don't believe it. And what made me Indian and not Malaysian? Where I was born. Unless a man is born again, come on, please complete the sentence for me. Unless a man is born again, cannot enter the kingdom of God. And poor old Nicodemus, much older than I am right now, he's like, what? Should I go back into my mother's womb? Jesus says, that's not what I'm talking about. Please, Nicodemus, you are a teacher of the law and you don't get it. Just because you're a theologian doesn't mean you get it. Just because you're a pastor doesn't mean you get it. You must be born of the water and the Spirit. He didn't even get that one. Okay? It took Nicodemus a long time to get it. And it's taken Christians forever to get it. In order to be holy, we have to be born again. We have to register with a new government. We have to be part of a new kingdom. We have to accept a new king over us. None of it is innate. You understand the word innate, I hope. Am I using some words you don't get? That means it's not natural to us. It's not within us. But it can be derived. Just like that battery on your phone. The electricity comes from somewhere else. But it reaches your phone, and you can recharge your phone, and then you can use your phone. Okay? A few months ago, we had to deal with really, really bad pollution in Bangkok. Not just Bangkok, actually most of the country. Everybody got to learn some new vocabulary. It was called particulate matter 2.5 or PM 2.5. Every modern city has this. But as long as the reading is around 50 and below, it's considered normal for a modern city. It's considered okay. Bangkok was registering 160, 190, 200, 220. The pollution was so bad that when I leave the house in the morning and driving to work, it was like a fog in front of me. You could actually see it. It's like thick, you could almost feel it. You can smell it. And the government told people that because particulate matter 2.5 is so small that it can get even through the pores in your skin and definitely into your nose and so on. So they were giving out these free masks that really block up your whole face. I made fun of my students because they all ended up looking like aliens, from one of those movies. Some of them felt so bad they took off their masks, and then I felt bad for hopeless influence. But I told them, you can't even get rid of this stuff. It's everywhere. It gets into everything. It smells like acrid, something, like something's burning somewhere in the mind. And people were getting sick left and right because of it. We have it every year, but this year was a little bit unusual. It was a little worse than they ever anticipated. And here was the thing about it. Even the meteorological guys admitted that the only way that this PM 2.5 will ever be removed is when the rains come and the wind blows. In other words, nothing humans can do will remove PM 2.5. It takes acts of God for that to happen. They give advice for how people can try and reduce it, water your sidewalks more, water all the construction sites. They even told people you can spray water in the air, and we actually have pictures of people going out on the street and shooting water in the air they tried seeding the clouds and to bring water, rain. It was absolutely dry. And then the winds and the rains came, the first rains. And within days, PM 2.5 had disappeared. Well, at least you can't see it anymore. It's down to about 50 level right now. You see, we cannot become holy by spraying water in the air. God sends the rain and it all goes away. You get what I'm saying? Think of sin like pollution. And you and I cannot get rid of it. No amount of good works will remove the pollution of sin. In fact, I think most religious people have discovered the harder we try to remove sin, the more acute becomes our sense of how sinful we are. You know, the best way to counter putting on weight and trying to lose weight is to not stop eating. And you're like, wait a minute, Dr. Farah, you're not making sense now. What is this nonsense? I struggle with being a little bit rounder than I should be. The doctor was working with me, please, you need to bring your weight down. I couldn't get my BP down. HDL wouldn't go high enough, and LDL was staying up, and all kinds of things. I'm like, I tried exercise a lot. Okay, I tried some diet reduction. I did all kinds of things. Nothing happened. Nothing absolutely happened. Then about 3 years ago, those of you who have seen me for the last 3 years, you've probably seen some less roundness now than 3 years ago.
Yes.
Yesterday, that was one of the first things this beautiful couple said to me. Did you lose weight? It's very nice when people say, did you lose weight? Not so nice when they say, did you gain some weight? You may not believe, but 3 years ago I was 90 kilos. And I tried, nothing happened. And then I came across this BBC program, 12 practical steps to losing weight. And the first thing in the program is, don't stop eating. And I'm like, hallelujah, praise the Lord. Fasting doesn't work for me. But then they explain the science. See, when you fast, your body sends an electrochemical message, your stomach, to your brain. It's called hunger pang. But it's not just any message. It tells the brain that you want rich food. So when people fast, they will end up eating richer food after the fast is over. So they said, when you stop eating, you're not going to lose weight, because you might end up gorging on the other end when you think, okay, it's come down, and you get back to something worse. The next thing they said, which made a lot of sense, change your plate size. And they showed by scientific experiment that if you go from a plate that size to a plate that size, you will reduce the amount of food you eat without even trying by about 40%. Okay, so I use small size plates now. Smaller one. Until my cousin's house last night. Man, it was so nice to meet her, but she's a very good cook, and I ended up sleeping too much and then didn't sleep well with her stomach so full last night. Okay. Sin contaminates. And when you look at the book of Leviticus and the sanctuary, there are certain basic contaminants. The most contaminating thing is, of course, sin itself, or whatever you think that sin is, but you remember the different categories. But bodily emissions also contaminates. This is why you have some strange rules about menstruation for women that don't seem to make sense in our modern world, but you need to read it in context. The people living in the desert, and any kind of bodily emission, not just for women but also for men, is seen as a contaminant, and therefore makes you unclean. Mildew or mold was a contaminant. So if you have mildew in your clothes, mildew on your walls, if mold grows anywhere, that contaminates. So it becomes a symbol of sin. Fat contaminates. I'm not talking about this fat. The fat in the animal that you eat. Okay? And you'll see later why this affects what we eat. Fat is a contaminant. Right? Skin disease was seen as contaminants. Which was the most dreaded skin disease in Bible times? Leprosy. And we know leprosy is contagious. We don't see leprosy so much in our world anymore because we've learned how to deal with it. But I can still remember one of my theology professors took the theology group for a field trip to the city of Calcutta. And our project was to go and work with Mother Teresa's Sisters of Mercy. And I've never been near a leper ever in my life. In fact, that's the only time. And we had to spend a whole day with the Sisters of Mercy in the leper colony in Calcutta. That was one of the worst days of life. I couldn't figure out how these ladies could do what they did. No gloves, only faith. They would treat these lepers, knowing that they could contract leprosy, and some of them do contract leprosy. Okay. And they accept that as being part of the will of God as well. If ever there was a group of Christians that I really admire, that was one, because I can't do what they did. I'm sorry. It's much easier to stand here and do a seminar. It's much purer act. Working among lepers. Okay. And so for the ancient Israelites, this was an easy contaminant, because you can see how it changes the skin and so on. Anybody here has never seen a leper?
Never seen.
So I'm talking to how many of you have seen one? Have ever met a leper? Okay. It's not a nice thing to see. Leprosy kills the nervous system. Okay, and begins with the extremities. And so these lepers, I learned, could be sleeping at night in these terrible colonies, and a rat comes and chews up their fingers, and they don't know the finger is gone because there's no more feeling, there's no nerves. And they get decapitated that way, or they have an accident and, hey, my foot is gone, but there's no pain. And then it begins to decolor his skin, it spreads all over, and so on and so forth. So an easy contaminant to understand. Here's another one, carcasses, a dead body. Now here's the thing, the holier the person is, the greater the degree of contamination. And this is why the high priest, Aaron, when his sons were killed in the sanctuary, they were not allowed to even mourn for them, let alone go near the body or try to bury it. They couldn't even touch. Do you know what that must have felt like, being a parent? But because they would have been so horribly contaminated, they would not be able to continue with their duties at the sanctuary. It's quite a hard lesson for us to understand because of things in our world. But of course, if you have contaminants, then there are purifiers. One of the purifiers in the sanctuary, and you meet this again and again in the sacrificial system, is water. Now we understand that too. That's why we take a bath. We all shower in the morning. Okay. When you've had a long day and you've been sweaty all day, what is the first thing you want to do when you get home? Take a shower. Until you live in very cold countries where people don't shower every day because it's too cold. And then you wonder, how do you keep clean? That's what I discovered about living in Michigan. It's easy to shower here because of the heat. But when it's so cold that even the hot water doesn't feel nice, you're like, I need to take a shower. Another purifier is fire. And so the offerings were burnt in fire, especially the main offering, the olah. Right? And then sacrifice was a purifier. This is why we need the sacrifice. This is why Israel were told, don't come before the Lord with empty hands, because that sacrifice purifies them through a degree of transference of their sin away from themselves. But there were some things that could do both. Blood was one of them. Blood was a powerful contaminant, but also a powerful purifier. And therefore, when you read the laws about blood, then it begins to make sense. Okay, wait a minute, you could contaminate, you could purify it. So you have to be really careful with this. Can you think of anything in our world today that can do both? Chlorine. You know chlorine? What do we use chlorine for? clean water, isn't it? But chlorine is actually poisonous to us. What would happen to you if there was too much chlorine in the water, or if you were to drink chlorine itself? Well, that would be the least of your problem. Death would be more like it. You know, we use chlorine all the time. Almost all the water you use that comes out of your tap, in the swimming pools, and even the ones in the bottles, have been purified by some chlorine treatment, in addition to reverse osmosis and sunlight and so on. But that chlorine is poisonous to us. But there's something else that is absolutely essential to our lives, but it's also poisonous to us. It's called oxygen. Do you know that pure oxygen would kill you instantly? And yet without oxygen we can only live for a few seconds. How long can you hold your breath? Okay, let's do an exercise. A breathing exercise. This will wake you up. Okay? Take a deep breath and hold it until I tell you to release. If you think you're going to pass out or die, you can release. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Hold your breath. I'm the only one who's allowed to speak and do whatever. I can do whatever I like. Try to hold that breath. Let's see how long you can hold before you begin to lose consciousness. Okay, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. If you start to feel bad, don't die on me again. I don't want to go back with a guilty conscience. 20 seconds. Anybody breathe out already?
Yes.
Yeah.
25 seconds. Anybody still holding? 30 seconds. Still holding? 40 seconds. Who are still holding? Okay. 45 seconds. Still holding. You should hold without your hand, without the help of your hand. 50 seconds. 55 seconds. Please let go if you think you're going to pass out, okay? 60 seconds. How many of you are still holding 60 seconds? Okay. Why is that happening to you? Please breathe now, okay? It's all right. Why do you feel like you're going to lose consciousness or you're going to go to a different planet? Because by holding your breath, you are increasing carbon dioxide without release and decreasing the amount of oxygen you can intake. But if you were to breathe pure oxygen, you would die instantly. Because it's too strong for our body to handle. It's a very strong gas. It's one of the great explosive gases. It might explode, become a walking terrorist bomb. Easy. And so God in His wisdom puts only the right amount of oxygen in the atmosphere and then dilutes it with a very inert gas called nitrogen so that we can breathe and we are alive. Really, if God increases that oxygen by even 1%, you won't be alive anymore. How much oxygen is in the air, approximately? About 20%, right? The rest of it is inert nitrogen, which doesn't do anything to your body. So oxygen is absolutely essential to life, but it can also kill you. You begin to see what's happening here, that this idea repeats itself again and again. Blood is like that. Okay? So the blood of the sacrifice purifies the sinner, but blood that is associated with menstruation or the wrong kind of killing or whatever contaminates the sinner. Right? Animals have the same impact. Some animals are considered clean and therefore they help with the purification process. Others are considered unclean and therefore they will contaminate. And this affects how sacrifice is done and how food is eaten. It's a very simple categorization. Here's the catch. God establishes the parameters, not us. God is the one who says these will contaminate, these will purify, these will do both. It is God who sets out those borders. All we can do is learn what the borders are. It's just like, how many of you have ever driven across the border, say in Singapore or in Thailand? What is the first thing you notice as you go through the border? One side is the Malaysian customs and immigration. A few meters, the other side is the Thai immigration and customs. And the moment you do that, you know you are no longer in Malaysia. You are now in Thailand. And the laws in Thailand are different, including some of the driving laws in Thailand are different from Malaysia. And so it's not like you can just simply cross over and you'll be perfect over there. No. Okay. One of the big differences in driving in Thailand is that when traffic is really tight, it is okay, and this the law actually allows, it is okay for people to build up an extra lane on the shoulder. It's a bit of a hassle. I wish they would not do that, but it happens. You know, in other countries, including Malaysia, you are not allowed to do that. Doesn't matter how heavy the traffic, you don't drive on the shoulder. Okay. But in Thailand, you can. Also, if you're driving on the T junction, the T junction is this way and you're going this way, if you're on the outer lane, even though traffic is coming from this side, you can keep going, and even though your traffic light is red. You cannot do that here in KL. Okay? And so you've got those things. And then of course if you drive in India, then there are no lanes at all. You know, go wherever you want to go. It doesn't matter. I was in Phnom Penh many years ago, and so one of my students took me out and with some other friends, okay, let's go for dinner. And I noticed they just kept driving, light is red, green, or whatever, it doesn't matter. I said, hey, wait a minute, you know the lights are going red, but you're still driving. And they're green and you're driving, eh? Nobody is really bothering with the lights so much. At the most, they might slow down at the traffic light. So I said, how come? He said, well, at that time, I think Cambodia has changed. He said, at that time, traffic lights are just suggestions. And so it's difficult to when you cross that border, you have to relearn. And God sets out the borders. He says, this is my kingdom. Okay? And so you and I cannot debate the issue. We can only decide whether to go across the border or not. We cannot say, okay, God, I'm driving across, but can I change the borders a little bit and have different parameters? No, God says, this is what I have set for you. Okay, so how does this affect us? We will see how holiness affects us on the horizontal scaling and on the vertical scaling, because I think that will give you a fuller picture. For instance, when you look at life, oh, Valerie, it's not going to come out right. Yeah, never mind. Yeah, never mind. Sorry. I will let your imagination go. Okay. Life is seen as degrading from what is normal to death and total disorder. Okay? Holiness is also graded that way, from what is considered holy of holies to the ultimate opposite of that, Sheol. Alright? Same in relationship to people. God, of course, is the holy, holy, holy one. And then the very opposite of that would be the dead ones. Okay? That's the grading of life. And then a perfect sacrifice, the very opposite of that would be a carcass. A perfect sacrifice, you know, creates holiness. The carcass contaminates completely. So kadosh is holy. Sorry, the computer changed the arrangement a little bit. The opposite of kadosh is karen. Okay, try and remember that word, because if somebody asks you what's the opposite of kadosh, in English you would say unholy. Sorry, in Hebrew it's karen. And what does karen mean? Karen means that whatever becomes karen is now devoted to destruction. The word literally means devoted to destruction. Okay, so this is something so far away from holy and so contrary to holy that it cannot actually exist. And so therefore it must be destroyed. If you were to put a line, and this is, well, okay, it still works. Okay. Once something crosses to the other side of this line, they become haram. How many levels of sin did we look at yesterday? 4. Which of them is on that side of the line? Which sin crosses to this side of the line? No, not Pesha. Pesha is here, but very close to the line. Yadrom. The blasphemy against God, the blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, the high hand, or whatever you know. So anything that crosses over to that side of the line, an object, contaminated stuff, a person, will become keren. Even an angel who crosses that line becomes keren. What is the name of the angel? Sorry, his name is not Lucifer. Lucifer is Latin translation. His name in the Hebrew Bible is Hallel ben Shakar. Interestingly, that name, literally it means the star of the morning. Literally that name is used only twice in the Bible. In Isaiah it's applied to that angel. In Revelation it's applied to Jesus. And so we understand why he crossed that line. What did he try to do? I will be like the Most High. The easiest way to cross that line is to think you are God. And this is why idolatry was such a major issue in the Torah and so on. The prophets. So anything that goes down that line is keren. And what that means is that there is no salvation available on that side of the line. Whatever we think about salvation is only available on this side of the line. It doesn't matter. So even humans can move to that side of the line if they're not careful with their lives. And once we do that, then sorry, there is no salvation. And so when we read about the kings of Judah in 2nd Chronicles, they constantly make the assessment that they were godly or that they were ungodly. What they were saying is that those who were considered godly, they made mistakes too, but they were still sitting on this side of the line. Those who were considered ungodly means that they had crossed the side of the line, and therefore there would be no salvation. You will not meet Ahaz in the New Jerusalem. And so it's a very interesting picture of what happens. Now we can also look at this concept vertically. Okay, so at the top is Kadosh, at the bottom is Keren. In between you have what is known as the common, or if you're using King James Bible, it's often translated as the profane, or what it means as the common. And this is where it gets interesting. The common is divided into two sub-realms, what is clean and what is unclean. And so a person could be an ordinary Israelite, but through a process of cleaning, he can move towards Kadosh. But through a process of unclean, he could become Keren. And even holy things can become Keren. However, what is Keren cannot move up no matter what. And so here we have two holy men, Nadab and Abihu, priests of God, come to a very holy place called the tent, the sanctuary, the tabernacle. But they bring an unholy fire. We don't know what that means, but it was probably not the fire from the altar. And what happened to them? Instant death. Keren. The lake of fire is the ultimate Keren. Whoever is in the lake of fire is truly Keren. Anybody in the city is safe, because in the New Jerusalem everything is Kadosh. Everything in the lake of fire is Keren. There are many other Bible stories. There was a Levite by the name of Korah who led a rebellion against Moses. He even got a few people to back him up. Now, a rebellion against Moses was a rebellion against God. What happened to good old Korah and his friends and their families? They were swallowed up by the earth. Keren. Because once Keren, you cannot continue living. Because Kerem and Kadosh cannot coexist in time and space. Kadosh will destroy whatever is Kerem. Other examples. A soldier in Joshua's army, his name was Achan. What did he do? God told the Israelites, you must not take anything for personal from the city of Jericho. All of it will belong to God. All of it will be devoted to God. What did Achan do? What did he steal? Well, it's called looting in wartime. Okay? What was the loot that he took? There was some gold and silver, but some special garments. Those garments were not just any kind of clothes. They were garments worn either by priesthood or by prophets. I'm not sure that you know this, but even the Bible prophets wore special clothes. There were 3 people who had special clothes in the Bible. The priests, obviously, we all know that. But the prophets also wore special clothes. And sometimes it's described, as in the case of Elijah and John the Baptist, and then a group called the Nazarites. Can you think of a very strong and very fast Nazarite? Samson. Being a Nazarite, by the way, makes you one of the holiest people in the nation. What did Samson do that made him Kerem? You all know the story of Samson, do you not? A lot of movies about Samson, most of them inaccurate. He had a problem. What was his main problem? Not women. Be careful with the stories of the Bible. Be very careful with Bible stories. There is an exegetical skill called close reading. This way, pay attention to what it's actually saying. He had a problem with Philistine women. He loved Philistine women. His parents told him there are hundreds of Israelite women available. He doesn't care. There are people, by the way, like this, who just fall in love with one particular race. Now, we're not sure why, except with a little help from archaeology. The Philistines were part of a big invasion of the Mediterranean world known as the Sea Peoples. They clearly came from Europe. Okay, think about it. This Arab man, darker skin, darker hair, he sees these lighter skinned women with lighter colored eyes and lighter colored hair, and he goes crazy. I want one. He gets one, and the Philistines don't like it, and they end up killing his wife and his family. He takes another, who turns out to be so money-minded that she would sell her own husband. What was the thing that signified his holy connection with God? His hair. Can you imagine how long his hair and beard, by the way, would have been? Never cut since the day he was born. Come on, imagine this. Samson would have been in his 30s when we meet him. Can you imagine how long his hair would be? It's like those kung fu movies, they can kill somebody with it. The moment his hair was chopped off, he became just a normal man. All that extra strength and speed were gone. And what ultimately happens to poor Samson? He dies, isn't it? In that temple thing. Yes, we hope, by the way, the story is told that he got things back on track with God at the very last minute. But the ending is still death. What is even sadder is that after Samson, there were no more strong judges in Israel, and the nation went haywire, completely off the tracks. Some of the worst stories you can read in the Bible come in those last few chapters of the book of Judges. And I've never ever heard any pastor dare to preach those chapters. Stories that involve everything from gang rape to genocide to tribal warfare to just about any kind of sin you can think of. And the book ends up with this statement: there was no king in Israel at that time, and everybody did what they think was right in their own eyes. That's Kerem. Can you think of cities that became Kerem? Sodom and Gomorrah. We tend to think of their sin as being a sexual one. Yes, there was a strong sexual component, but I think violence was the main thing about Sodom and Gomorrah. And God destroys them. And then there was the world of Noah. God saw that the evil was so great that every thought of every moment of every part of their life was evil. And so God says, I will destroy them. I will clean up the earth. And then Jesus tells us this. As it was in the days of Noah, so will it be in the days when the Son of Man returns. So the world will reach the same level of cherem. Now, how do we know that Jesus hasn't come back? Well, I'm still here. Why am I still here? Because the world has not reached cherem level yet. We may be very close to that level, but we haven't reached. Because the moment we reach cherem, God will destroy. Cannot coexist with Him. What happens to Noah's world? What happens to Sodom and Gomorrah? What happens to the individual stories? This will take place. And so when you see the 7 plagues of Revelation 16 beginning to happen, you know cherem has come. And you have the Egyptians, who also became cherem because of how they treated the Israelites in the Exodus story. And God sends plagues in them. Can you imagine the environmental and economic cost of those 10 plagues? And then multiply that by 1,000,000 times with the 7 plagues in Revelation 16. Then you will understand how awful it would be for the world as well. Paul says that it's an awful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. He wasn't talking about kadosh. He was talking about cherem. So when you're trying to figure out all those clean and unclean do's and don'ts of Leviticus, they're all set against this backdrop, kadosh and cherem. And the only way to stay in the kadosh world is to do or to follow the instructions of God. Because if you don't follow those instructions, you might slide to cherem without even realizing it. Jesus says that there are 2 roads people can take. One road will lead to eternal life. The other road will lead to eternal damnation. Nothing changes in the Bible. It's exactly the same. So while the saints of God will be in the New Jerusalem, the rest of those who follow the dragon will be in the lake of fire. This never shifts in the Bible. Okay? So holiness is dual-edged, and this is where we must be careful. It's like the electricity and the oxygen and the water. That electricity which runs all of our gadgets, all of our machines. We can't even live without it anymore. We have even forgotten candlelight and torchlight and every kind of other light. We only know electric one now. That thing can kill you any moment. One job that I know I will never envy. I don't have to break the 10th commandment with that job. And that is an electrician's job. I'm amazed at these guys who, go wiring the house. And, they open the thing up and they do this and they do that. And I'm like, oh. They were doing some wiring in my teacher's room before I came. I'm like, I'm not going to touch that stuff. Even if you paid me, sorry, I teach. That's safer. That man didn't seem to, he was doing his job very nonchalantly, like, he didn't care, but he knew what he was doing. He's clearly quite good at it. But we know the power is available. That power is essential to us, like the sun, but it's also dangerous. We also cannot live without water, but it can also kill us. Anybody here, like me, cannot swim? The rest of you are fish? Okay, I do have some friends. Thank you very much. And so one of the worst things for a person who doesn't swim is people inviting you to a swimming pool or to a beach I love going on holidays to mountains, so I don't have to worry about water. But in Thailand, people always want to go where? To the beach. Let's go to the beach. And I'm like, no, beach. No way. I don't want to go to the beach. One of my worst experiences as a father was a church camp from Singapore in Cameron Highlands. We were walking along this, don't ask me where in Cameron Highlands, I have no idea. This was 1993, 1994, so my memory is good, but not that good. It was a strawberry patch that I remember, and there was a mountain stream down on the slope, and then the mountain, the stream went down over to a short waterfall. And so we're walking up there, and many kids were playing in the water, and my daughter said, Papa, can I go and play in the water too? Now remember, I don't swim, and we're up on the path there, and this thing drops into a short waterfall. And my daughter was, as a child, very accident prone. How many of you have children who are accident prone? I'm not talking about little accidents, but big ones like flying off a moving car or waterfall in Cameron Highlands. But the child wants to play. No, I'm a good father. No, I really am a good father. Okay. Okay. Go and play. There were other kids there playing, but also worrying because I cannot swim and my daughter is accident prone. Now I could see from the top, the water was quite shallow, but the floor was kind of rocky, but a lot of moss on the rocks. And my fears came true in a graphic way. I watched as my daughter slipped on those rocks and the current was carrying her towards the waterfall. And all I could do was freeze. Nothing. First, I was too far away. Secondly, even if I got in the water, I'd probably go down with her. A boy, and I never got to know who he was, but all we learned is that it was from KL, another group, not our group. He jumped into the river, and he was apparently a good swimmer, and he pulled her out just before she hit the falls. That's why I don't like water. If God wanted us to be fish, He would have given us scales. Come on. So I keep away from it. Now, I use water. I take a bath. I drink a lot. Okay. I wash my car. I don't like to take to the car wash. I prefer to do my own washing. I wash my clothes. So I use water an awful lot. But I know how dangerous it also can be. Almost everything in our lives is that way. Food keeps us alive, but eat too much and you will die. How many of you love rice? Like me. If you're not a rice lover, you're not Asian, so woe be unto you. But rice is one of the main causes of diabetes in Asia. Wait a minute, Dr. Fanwar, don't spoil my life. Why do I need to know all of this stuff? The biggest killer in Asia right now is actually salt, not even rice. There are more people dying from what is called non-communicable diseases that are related to your heart, your liver, and everything else. And salt is causing a lot of problem in those things. And Asian food has way too much salt. From salted fish to salted egg. My favorite egg in Thailand is salted egg. They soak the egg in salt and then they let it virtually ferment for about a month and so on. Oh, I love that stuff. I'm almost addicted to it. And I have hypertension, and that's not a good combination. I cannot tell the doctor how much salt I absorb. No, actually, I'm very careful. Okay. Can you imagine eating without salt? Cooking without salt? No, I cannot imagine. Life would be horrible without salt. But salt is dangerous to us. Too much of it and it can kill us. Think of anything in our lives. It's dual-edged. Every single thing. And so the Bible teaches that holiness is dual-edged as well. There is the redemptive side of holiness. And there is the retributive or judgmental side of holiness. The redemptive side is where grace operates. Grace enables redemptive benefits. The retributive side is where law operates, because law seeks to protect us from the effects of retribution. Your seminar has been advertised as law or grace. Well, I think you got the answer already. One helps us to experience the benefits of holiness. The other one protects us from the energy of holiness. This is what Leviticus is really all about. God wants to make sure that we are alive at the end of the day. He doesn't want anybody to be Karen. Remember the text in 1 Peter, for God is not willing that any should perish, but all should come to repentance. This is where He wants us to be. But He is also this. And so He gives us law after law after law, even laws that don't seem to make sense anymore, to protect us from this. It's like giving us a protection suit so that you can go into a nuclear reactor and work there. It's like giving you a sunblock so that you can enjoy the beach without turning into toast. It's like giving you a thick coat so that you can walk through a blizzard and not become icicle. We often have a negative view of law. Law as being restricting. I hope that you change after today. Law is protection. It's protection. It's not God trying to limit our lives. It's God keeping us safe. Can you imagine what would happen on the streets here in KL if there were no laws and drivers did, like the Israelites in the book of Judges, do anything they felt like doing? So one wants to go very fast, one wants to go very slowly, one wants to change lane whenever and doesn't signal, another one insists on signaling. What would happen on the streets? Come on, many of you are on the road a lot. So what do those laws do for you? They actually keep you alive. Without those laws, this seminar wouldn't happen. Because I think all of you would be in hospital. And you know, some people, despite the law, they still are crazy on the road. I saw a piece of road rage in KL. Don't see that much in Thailand. There's a minor little accident, fender bender as the Americans call it, and these two guys were so upset with each other. They were, whatever. We were just driving through. I'm like, in Thailand, people won't even bother with that. Okay. People get upset on the road. You've heard of air rage. People get upset in an airplane. Okay. If there were no laws, all the upset people would be killing everybody around them that they're upset with. And then all the non-upset people after a while would start getting upset. It's like, what business do you have? Most of us now in the modern world, we live in communities, isn't it? I came across a term with my cousin yesterday that we don't use in Thailand at all, gated community. I didn't want to show my ignorance too much, so I didn't ask her, what do you mean by gated community? I just observed what was happening so I understand what it means. Why are people choosing to live in a gated community? Security, precisely. But gated communities have very strict laws about how you go in, how you go out, about where you can park your car and where you cannot park your car, about bringing visitors and strangers to your house, about how you maintain your lawns and everything else. But all of those keep everybody safe, isn't it? So God says, I want you to be holy, but you are sinful humans, so you have no idea what that means. So here is my protection for you. My grace enables you to live in my presence, even though you are still sinful. My law enables you to live there without fear and not have to worry that I might do something wrong or I might get the equation wrong. So grace is the redemptive side of holiness, God's holiness. Law is the retributive side, or rather the insulation from the retributive side that God gives to his people. Now, we may not need a literal application of all the laws in Leviticus, but when we understand what they were intended to do, we can sit back and say, hey, wait a minute, that makes sense. It can help us. It can give us some security, some safety. Okay. So it is time for a break. When we come back, we will look at some of those collection of laws about food, about sexuality, and so on and so forth, and see how God tried to provide insulation so his people can always be holy. But I think Valerie raised a question that we need to understand as we get into the law section. You see, when you become holy, then God calls upon you to live a certain way so that you will remain within that realm of holiness. So the law becomes the description of how you live. Most Christians tend to look at the law as the cause of who we will become. So if I keep all these laws, then I become holy. No, in Leviticus, I keep these laws because I am holy. Let me use a more scientific thing. I hope you listen to this because it's playing with words a little bit. Is an apple because it is an apple tree because it bears apples, or does an apple tree bear apples because it's an apple tree? Okay, let me say it slowly. That was intended. Okay, so that you will say, what in the world is going on here? Okay, is an apple tree because it bears apples, or does an apple tree bear apples because it is an apple tree? It's the second equation, isn't it? It is the nature of an apple tree to bear apples. Would you go looking for mango on an apple tree?
No.
No, you can go, but you won't find it. You all have to be a little careful with me. I'm dangerous with words. I'm very mild and absolutely non-violent, but I know how to use words. Okay? Even Jesus talks about this. Can you have good fruit from a bad tree? Or would a good tree not produce anything but good fruit? And the Song of the Vineyard shows the disappointment of God when he talks about his vineyard, and he said, I gave it the best, planted the choicest vines, prepared the soil, and cleared the stones. But when I looked for the grapes, they were sour grapes, or inedible grapes. Those grapes were thinking, we have to produce the right grapes, then people can say, oh, that's a grape vine. Now, I have a mango tree in front of the house where I live. It's a young mango tree. Now, I've been in that house for 3 years now, and the mango tree has produced very little fruit. But is it still a mango tree? Yes. You know that most mango trees take a few years before they really begin to produce. So most of my neighbors who have older trees, man, they have mango hanging from everywhere. And because this is a gated community, if you want to use that phrase, nobody's really harvesting those mangoes. They're just hanging there. I want so much to harvest my neighbor's mangoes, but that's a word for it. It's called theft. So I'd rather stay away from it. So I'm waiting for the day that my mango tree will actually produce some good mangoes to eat. But that mango tree is still a mango tree even when there's no fruit. And does the mango tree produce fruit every time of the year? No. Fruit trees produce fruit when? Seasonal, isn't it? Okay. And so you don't go looking for the fruit, but does the tree is it not a mango tree outside of that season? No. It is still a mango tree. You see, being holy is about the nature of who we are. Law is about the insulation to maintain that nature so that we do not become Karen. And so let's have a look at some of these interesting laws of God. Some of you already asked questions, even though we haven't been to the laws yet. This is like anticipating. Okay, I know where you're going next. Okay, let me ask you a question. There are different types of laws in Leviticus, and that is important. You cannot lump all of them into one basket. Oh, law, it must be all law. No, sorry. It's more like a fruit salad. Okay? We have laws that we can call descriptive laws. They tell us principles of life, but spell nothing more than that. God says, you shall not kill. Okay? But he doesn't say what happens if you do. He says, you shall not steal. He doesn't say you might lose your hand if you steal. Okay, so there are laws, and we know these by a common term, most Christians, as the 10 Commandments. Though that word commandments is not used in the Torah for these 10. Throughout the Torah, they're simply referred to as the 10 words of God, because literally that's what they are. They're describing general ideas that God has about life. You know, you will not worship another God. You will not use my name in a meaningless way. You will remember my Sabbath. You will honor your parents. You will not take life. You will not take wife. You will not take things. Okay? And you will not desire what is not yours. Which commandment, by the way, is the hardest of those 10? Which is the hardest one to keep? The one that even Christians cannot keep?
The fourth law.
No, number 10 is the hardest. It says you shall not, the Hebrew word is you shall not desire anything. It's the same word used in Genesis 3 when Eve looked at the fruit that God says do not eat, and it says that she desired the fruit. It's the same word. Anybody here has no desire? Some of you have so much food desire, you're still eating even though we're starving.
Obedience.
One of the things I am as a teacher is I see everything and I hear everything that happens in the classroom. It drives my students crazy. You heard that, sir? Yes, I heard it. You saw that, that's what you didn't see. We have desires for career progression, we have desires for family, we have desires for kids, we have desires for cars, we have desires for clothes, we have desires for drinks, we have desires for, come on, Haagen-Dazs, whatever. Desire for your football team to win. No. Sorry, Alex. You know, Alex is a really nice man, but we are on two different planets when it comes to football. Okay. We have desire to be like our neighbors. We have desires to have what our neighbors have. Desire is the opposite of the will of God. God says don't eat, and we're like, wow, it looks nice. Let me try it. If God wanted you to have $1 million, you would be a millionaire right now. So for you to want to be a millionaire, that's the 10th commandment. We cannot be what God does not make us to be. I'd love to be rich. So instead, God gives me a lot of rich knowledge. I have very bad eyes, but my ears are way too good. I hear things that I don't want to hear. Okay. I can't always see very far. If I remove my glasses, I can see very few of you. But I can hear who is crunching on a cracker at the back of the room. I don't have to see. It's a great advantage for a teacher because a student thinks, we know his eyesight is bad, then they realize, okay, wait a minute, you just heard what I said. And so on. Holiness is about the nature of who we are, what God has made us to be. The laws is God's protective suit. Okay, so let's have a look at some of these. And there's another kind of law. Most of Leviticus belongs to this group. They're called prescriptive laws. These laws say if you do this, this would be the result. If you do that, this would be the punishment, something like that. Right? And then you have liturgical laws. These have to do primarily with the sacrificial system. And these are the laws that Paul says have been fulfilled in Christ. And that is interesting because it means the other kinds of laws have not been fulfilled in Christ. And therefore, conclusion is they're still applicable in some sense. But be careful about being too literal in the application. You will get into problems with it. And then the other part of Leviticus deals with what we would call lifestyle laws. Okay. Now this is where, you remember the warning I gave you in the very first session that we had? Some of you might feel uncomfortable. It's like taking that muscle relaxant, okay? So if you feel uncomfortable at this stage, blame God. Don't throw stones at the messenger. Okay? All right, let's talk about the food laws because they form a big chunk of laws, for better or for worse. Okay, Leviticus 16 and 17 primarily, but you find pieces of them in chapters 1 to 7 and elsewhere. Okay. Important considerations are these. God sets out the categories which are both liturgical and dietary. In Leviticus, food has two sides to it. If something can be used as a sacrifice, you can eat. If something cannot be used as a sacrifice, you cannot eat. It's a very simple categorization. Those two things must converge. Most people who read Leviticus food laws completely misunderstand the food laws. These are not food laws for food law's sake. It's not about nutrition. It's not about health. It's about worship. So the two things should converge, and God set the category for it. Okay, it's not for us to decide. All right? Second consideration is this, that in the Torah, God supplies the main diet for Israel. It was called manna. God attempted to cure Israel of their dietary propensities by giving them a certain food to eat. Now, manna is also described as the food of heaven. It's described as a flake, it was white in color. You could cook it, broil it, boil it, fry it. You could do whatever you want with it. And so you can make manana bread, you can make manana pancakes, you can make manana french fries, whatever you want. Okay? Imagine the Israelite feelings after a few days of eating manna in the morning, manna in the evening, manna at noonday, manna all day long. They were like, God, can you give us some leeks and garlics and some meat? What is this manna thing? Okay? But that's the intended diet. God wanted them to subsist that diet for 40 years. And for 40 years, the manna never stopped. But when they entered the land flowing with milk and honey, the manna instantly stopped. Okay. By the way, milk and honey there is Hebrew idiom for a land that's very fertile. It's not talking about cows and fruit trees again, or honeybees. It's an idiom. Don't take it literally. Otherwise, that would be a very sticky land flowing with milk and honey. It'd be like walking on candies, soft candy. Third consideration, animal was not intended to be a regular part of the prescribed diet. Never was in Scripture, from Genesis all the way down. Regardless of the fact that there are passages that are not easy to interpret. Okay, that seem to suggest something else. But this is the intended pattern of God. All right? It happened at creation, it was repeated here for Israel. Regulations then were provided about animal parts. Okay? So it's not just a question of what animal you can eat, it's also about what part of an animal you can eat that becomes an issue. And then regulations about which animals, on land, in water, and in the air. And then connection is maintained almost incessantly between worship and food. Okay? Not separated. And so this is important. The issue in Leviticus is not nutrition, but holiness. The longest holiness statement God made is found in Leviticus 11, two verses of the same statement. I am holy, I am your God, so be holy and eat holy. No, that part is not there. Some of you look at me so seriously, like it was actually a verse in the Bible. Come on, wake up. I know we just had a food break and all the oxygen is going down here instead of up here. Okay, so let's look first at the laws pertaining to animal parts. And the laws are quite straightforward. No fat or organs encased in fat can be eaten. All fat belongs to the Lord. You must not eat any fat or any blood. No blood can be eaten. For the life of a creature is the blood, and I have appointed it to you to make atonement on the altar for your lives, since it is lifeblood that makes atonement. Therefore, I say to the Israelites, none of you and no foreigner who lives among you may eat blood. Now remember a little bit back, both fat and blood are both contaminant and so on. And so God says no. The fat God claims as his. Later on in the prophets, we learn that fat is a symbol of sin. Okay, so by that measurement, the rounder a human is, the more sinful he is. The more bamboo-like a human is, the less sinful they are. No, that's not what he's talking about. And by saying that organs encased in fat basically wipes out all internal organs, because all internal organs are high in fat content, whether it's the liver or the heart or the lungs or the stomach. Okay, so God doesn't say you have to become a vegetarian. He says, yes, you can eat the animal, but not those parts of the animal. Some more. That if there is contact with a dead animal, a carcass, you become unclean. For every person who eats an animal that died, a natural death, or was mauled by wild beasts, is to wash his clothes, bathe with water. You have to go through a ritual cleansing, and he will remain unclean till evening. Then he will be clean. Now, most of the animals you eat these days are dead animals. Leviticus says that if you want to eat an animal, you have to eat a live kill. How many of you even know how to kill an animal? Where do you get the animals you eat? From the supermarket. How long has that animal been dead?
Frozen. 1 week.
This is why you have expired before or best used before. Why? Because you might get a piece of chicken that has been dead for a month. And Leviticus says that touching the dead contaminates. We already looked at this. You want to eat chicken? No harm, you can eat chicken. But go find one in the forest and kill it yourself and then eat it. That supermarket, you become unclean. And remember, unclean moves you towards which realm? Kadosh or Keren? Keren. Now, some of this may not make sense to us. Why? Today we have learned how to decontaminate. The animal is completely clean. You know, it's been treated, it's been frozen for so long, but it's been dead too. So, if one of the animals that you use for food, please listen to this, one of the animals that you use for food dies, anyone who touches its carcass will be unclean until evening. Never gets around this. There are people who will not eat pork, but they still do this. Still buy that dead chicken from, what is the biggest supermarket there? Giant? Tesco? Okay. Most people these days don't kill the animals that they eat. Come on, let's be honest. You live in the city. You don't have farms and gardens to have your own chicken. When I was growing up, that's what we had to do. You want milk, you keep a cow. You want egg, you have some chickens. You want to eat chicken, you have to kill a chicken. I was very good at doing it as a kid. I loved killing the chicken. Cut off their necks and release the body. They'll jump around for a few minutes until all the blood spreads about. And that was great fun. It was entertainment. We had no TV, so don't create our own TV. If you can do that, God says, okay, you can eat. Because He's trying to teach them a lesson. that when we eat an animal, we are taking a life. You may not like that idea. Hey God, it's just a dumb cow. Come on. But it's still alive. In Genesis 9, when God first permitted Noah and his family to eat, he told them, okay, you can eat the animals, but I will make you accountable for every life that you kill, human or animal. So God is counting how many chickens you've eaten in your life. That's one of the things recorded in the books of heaven. Fanwar-Leviticus has eaten 1,000 chickens in his life. Yeah, no, we can look at the fun side of all this. But the law is very simple and really very straightforward. How do we get around it? Okay. Let's move. But not only did we have law about the parts of an animal, about a dead animal, but how it must be slaughtered. If it's not slaughtered right, you cannot eat it. Okay? And so an animal must be properly slaughtered. And what that means is this: anyone who slaughters an ox, sheep, or goat in the camp, or slaughters it outside the camp, instead of bringing it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to present it as an offering to the Lord, in other words, you have to present it to God first before you slaughter it, take its life, that person will be charged with. So God says to the Israelites, you can eat that cow, but only if you kill it in the tent and make it a part of worship. You can't kill it in your tent or outside the tent. Now this is heavy. How many of you have seen this text before? I didn't invent it, by the way. It's on the PowerPoint, but it's from Scripture. This is heavy, because God is saying that your food and your worship must coincide. They must converge. Then it's okay to take the life of the animal. If not, it's murder. That person will be charged with murder. He has shed blood and must be cut off from the people. And the one phrase we do not understand in this book, in Leviticus, is that it never explains what this expression cut off means. Okay, it just tells us this will happen. An animal cannot be eaten if it cannot be used as sacrifice. That's the principle. Sorry. Go back. I'm always pressing around. If you cannot sacrifice that animal, you cannot eat it. This is why only a few animals were permitted for food, because those are the same animals that were permitted for sacrifice. Any other animal that could not be used as a sacrifice, you cannot be used as food. And there are basically 3 species of animals that could be used for both: the goat family, the sheep family, and the cow family. Any other family of animal could not be. But sometimes people might make a mistake, so God defines the lines a little clearer. For example, what kind of animals, what kind of birds. But here's the interesting thing. With animals, he gives criteria: chew the cud, cloven hooves, but he also gives a listing, so that you don't make a mistake. You may eat animal with divided hooves and choose the cud. Okay, anything in the water that has fins and scales. With fish, he only gives criteria, but he does something very different with birds. There is no criteria, sorry, I don't know if you can read that, only a listing. And that listing is the most insightful, because it tells us why God considers certain animals clean and certain unclean. Okay? And there's a science to this. It's not as arbitrary as we think it is. Okay. First of all, only a very small selection of animals were permitted for food. Okay, that's quite obvious. Animals that cannot be used as sacrifice, therefore can also not be used as food. But in that listing of birds, this is what comes out. There are 3 groups of animals that cannot be used for either sacrifice or food: predators, scavengers, and omnivorous animals. Why not predators? What's wrong with predators? They take life. Scavengers, they eat the dead. Omnivorous, mixture. All contaminants. And you don't have to be legalistic about this. It's fairly easy. Science can help you. Tells you the nature of an animal. What is a lion? What kind of animal is it? It's a predator. What is a vulture? It's a scavenger. What animal is omnivorous? Monkey. Chimpanzee. Chimpanzee are mostly vegetarian, but they will also eat meat. They will actually even kill for food. So sorry, those things are out. Pig is omnivorous too, yeah. Camel. Rat families. Hyena. Cheetah. Most of the canine and feline families, they're either predators or both predator and scavengers. So that removes a big chunk of animals. And that applies to fish and birds and so on. So you can eat a pigeon, but not an eagle. Okay. Fish is a bit hard because many fish that even the Jews consider clean are predators. For example, tuna. Tuna is considered clean, even by the Jewish people, but tuna is a predator. So technically, tuna is not clean. I'm sorry, those of you who have all your life been feasting on tuna thinking it was a clean fish, it actually doesn't fit the category. See, because it's not just about the scales and the fins, it's also about the nature of the animal. The only fish in the listing of the rabbis actually ended up making a list of 10 fish that you can eat. Of course, those are European fish, okay? But the only fish in that list of 10 that the rabbis made during the Middle Ages, the only one that is really neither a predator nor a scavenger nor omnivorous is salmon. Now I'm giving you something to chew on, literally. And that's the point. Most of the things that you can eat safely by the law are expensive. The safest bird to eat, because it really fits all the categories in the Bible, is quail. The safest fish to eat, because it fits all the categories, is salmon. The animals is a bit wider. You've got cows, you've got goats, you've got lambs. Another principle, only freshly slaughtered animals may be used for food. And this is important, I think, for modern people. Only freshly slaughtered. So you want to eat chicken, please go to the supermarket and ask them, do you have a fresh chicken? Something that you just killed 5 minutes ago. Can I have that food? You know what they're going to say to you, right? If you were to go there. What are you talking about? Yeah, go catch one yourself. Or whatever. And then, of course, keep in mind this. Blood, fat, internal organs are not for food. You can eat, but not those things. No, halal is not enough, it's kosher. Halal is a description of how the animal is slaughtered, so it meets one criteria. But kosher, what the Jews do, is the only one that meets all the criteria. And in order to make the meat kosher, they take the parts that you can eat, the muscle tissues and all, and soak it in brine to extract all the hormones from it. Kosher meat tastes like gluten. You'll become a vegetarian if you eat kosher meat. It's much easier. You can eat something made from soybean that tastes a lot better than kosher meat. What is God really trying to do with Israel? He is trying to get them back to the original intention. Everything is about that. Trying to get them back to that original intention. Okay, another set of laws. Quite a bit of space is devoted to these laws. Sexuality laws. All of chapter 18 and all of chapter 20 pertain to these laws. what is interesting is this. The context. The laws are put against the context. God says that all the forbidden things that the Canaanites did, you must not do, as Israelites. The sexual laws that God gave to Israel were not put in a vacuum. They were put against the context of the Canaanite people and what they were to do. Not the Egyptians, interestingly, okay, but the Canaanites. And the reason is this: the Canaanites mixed sexuality and worship. They were the first people that we know for sure in that ancient world, in that world of the Bible, that mixed sexuality and worship. And so what God does here is to divorce the two things. You cannot follow what the Canaanites have been doing. One of the most intriguing practices of the Canaanites is what is called sacred prostitution. Okay? And the highest form of worship in Canaanite culture is for you to go to the temple, have sex with a priestess who also serves as a prostitute, and that brings you to the highest spiritual point. If that's the case, Bangkok has the right idea. And you know what they call those priestesses who also serve as temple prostitutes? They call them Kodeshi, which means the holy ones. So God says, no, you will not live like the Canaanites. Amen. The laws involve things like incest. This covers the largest block of material. In fact, nearly half of chapter 18 is about this. Menstrual sex, same-sex intimacy, bestiality, and adultery. You know what bestiality is? Sex with an animal. You may think that is strange. I met a church deacon in Michigan. He ended up in jail because he was molesting his granddaughters, and in the course of the trial, it turned out that he had also had sex with his dog. So it still happens. But the main god of the Canaanites, Baal, was depicted as having sex with animals. He was the god of fertility, both in the natural world and in the human world. So God said, no, you're not going to be like the Canaanites. You will not live like them. You will not commit their practices. Now, like I said, most of the sexual laws are about incest, the majority. And this is interesting because in Genesis, almost every marriage story we read involved a family member, isn't it? You married a sister, you married an aunt, you married a cousin, or whatever. I know. Now God changes the paradigm. No more that kind of marriage. And so in the new laws that God gave Israel, your marriage must not be within the family. And he takes great pains to spell every relationship, not with your aunt, not with your father's concubine, not with your son, not with your daughter, so on and so forth. Very specific listing. Christian understanding of incest and sexuality within the family is driven by Leviticus because there is no discussion of this in any other book of the Bible. Christians believe that incest is against the Christian faith. Where did we get that idea? Not from Romans, not from Ephesians. There's nothing there. It's here. And so there's no way that a Bible-believing Christian can dismiss Leviticus. There's no way. You can't. Because if you do, then forget this as well. Yeah. Then everything is okay. God says no. That's how the Canaanites lived. Everything is okay. Whatever you like, do. God said, you are now holy. By the way, the Canaanite race was the race of people that God had declared Kerem from as far back as the Noah story. Now you see why. God wants to make sure the Canaanites occupied the land. Israel is now coming to replace the land. Okay, and these people are Kerem. We sometimes wonder why God asked Israel to destroy the Canaanites. Because they are Kerem people. They have been Kerem since Noah's days. Okay, and yet there was the danger that this holy nation of Israel will copy The Canaanites. And did they copy the Canaanites? Oh yes, they found Canaanite religion irresistible. And that became their struggle. Be kadosh or be karen. The Israelites thought they could have both. And there are lots of modern Christians who think exactly like the Israelites. We can have both. Jesus says that we are to be in the world, but not of the world. It doesn't mean that we have to eat some strange food, but it does mean that we might have certain restrictions the world may not care about. But those restrictions come because we are holy, not in order to prove we are holy. You know, I live in a country that still has an active monarchy. There are certain things that the royal family members cannot do. One of them is that a royal family member cannot stand for political office, for election. So in the last election we had, one of the parties proposed the name of one of the princesses, a sister of the current king, to be the next prime minister, to head their party. Oh, it became a big hoo-ha in the country. The party got dissolved because of it, just for doing that. Because a princess cannot lower herself to that level. She is a princess. She cannot dirty herself with the politics. Even the world understands this concept. Why do Christians struggle so much with it? Paul says that we are not only children of God, we are heirs of the kingdom. We are princes and princesses, and that means a different lifestyle. Have any of you watched the little movie called The Prince and the Pauper? Two little boys, one on the street, one in the palace, who look exactly alike. And one day by default they switch places. And the people in the palace thought something happened to this boy because he didn't know how to act like a prince. But they never knew he was not a prince. So they still treated him like a prince, even though he wasn't quite behaving like a prince. Maybe he's sick, maybe something's wrong with him. And the boy who ended up outside, he tries to establish his identity. I am the prince. And they're like, what? Smack you. You think you're the prince, huh? You're living here on the street with us. Eventually, of course, the reality is revealed. Okay? But that urchin had to learn how to be a prince. He had to learn how to walk, how to talk, how to hold a knife and fork when he's eating, and so on. Now, we all envy the royal families, but there are lots of things the royal family cannot do, whether it's in England or Denmark or Thailand, that normal people can do. I don't know enough about your royal family in Malaysia to make a statement. And I'm here. I've learned it's better not to be political in a country you're in, be in another one. Yeah. And I watch the royal family. There are privileges. When the royal family is on the road in Thailand, the entire highway, every road, everything is closed until they pass by. Oh yeah, they'll clear up this multi-lane highway just for 3 or 4 cars to go through. I've also learned the reason they do that is apparently a security thing, so that they can travel unimpeded on the roads, and they don't drive on those roads, they fly. I've never seen cars go as fast in Thailand as the royal entourage. These things will be gone, you see, and they're gone. They're doing 200k and above. So they clear up the whole highway. Most of the motorways in Thailand are 4-lane highways now, on either carriageway. They'll clear the whole thing. If it's inside the city, blocks of road. You get caught in one of those. I've been caught 3 times. One time, 1.5 hours you have to wait for the procession to pass through. Because they are the royal family. Okay? They have different rules to live by. We are God's royal family. We have different rules to live by. That's the real equation. Don't break your head about should I eat pork or should I eat squid. Worry about am I God's royal family or not. Because that determines what you do, not the other way around. Okay? The rationale over and over in these chapters is this. The Canaanites defied themselves on the land with these things. Therefore, you must not do that. The context is always Canaanite practices. Israel is intended to be a different model from the Canaanites. The comparison is always with the Canaanites, Kerem and Kadosh. You see, you ask, what about the other nations? No, none of them was described as Kerem at this stage, not even Egypt, but Canaanite was. And so that's a contrast. Israel was not to display the mixed up religion of the Canaanite. This was the real heart of the laws. The Canaanite mixed up sexuality and religion. God said, in a Kadosh world, those are two different things. You cannot mix them together. Israel is to demonstrate that holiness therefore becomes a lifestyle. Again, the Canaanite defile themselves in the land with these things, therefore you will not. Okay, let's look at Leviticus 19 a little bit. This one begins with this statement, I am Yahweh your God, therefore be holy as I am holy. And it ends with this statement, I am Yahweh your God, I am Yahweh. And when you read through Leviticus 19, you see an assortment of rules and regulations that don't seem to make sense. Like all kinds of things are lumped together and mixed together. However, about 15 times in the chapter, this expression, I am your God, I am Yahweh your God, is used. So clearly those laws have to do with this relationship. God says, I am your God. Okay? But when you analyze the laws in Leviticus 19, this is what actually appears. There's a bunch of them that deals with relationship with God. Talking about the Sabbath, the sanctuary, idolatry, sacrifices, harvest, sorcery, and so on. Then there's a bunch of laws that deal with human relationships. Parents and children, slaves and foreigners, neighbors, disabled, judicial practices, business practices, redeeming slaves, prostitution, deception, life preservation. A lot of them is what today we would call human rights. And I believe, and I'm suggesting, and I hope you think about it, that Leviticus 19, we have an elaboration of the Ten Commandments. They are repeated in different ways, but with the same format. The Ten Commandments are also divided into two groups of statements. Statements about relationship with God, statements about relationship with other people. And so this is the last major chapter of laws in the book. Okay? And it has this assortment that doesn't seem to make sense initially. But when you begin to sort them out and group them, you realize, hey, wait a minute, these are all talking about human-human relationships. These are all talking about human-God relationship. So they are mirroring the Ten Commandments, but also expanding on the Ten Commandments. And we see here the true implications of what it means to have relationships with the people around us. One of those interesting laws is this: you must treat foreigners in your midst as if they were your very own, as if they were your family. Because we must remember, you were foreigners once in another land. You must look after the widows and the orphans. You know, the disenfranchised in society today. Okay. You must do this and that towards these people, and then things about God. One of the interesting laws here is about tattoos. And there's no elaboration, but God says, you must not mark yourselves, you must not make tattoos in yourself. In the modern world, we may find it hard to understand what that means. But when you get right down to it, and you analyze this section, this panel here, you discover that the things relating to God are ideas that deal with creation. God has made you a certain way, and He expects you to be that way. And any attempt to change how you look is a tampering of creation. I was asked an interesting question in a Bangkok church group about cosmetic surgery. You know, Thailand is number 2 in the world after Korea in cosmetic surgery. So I gave them this answer. They were really disturbed. I said, if God wanted you to have a sharp Roman nose, He would have put one there. If God wanted you to 2 meters tall, he could have made you 2 meters tall. Remember the 10th commandment? Do not desire. If God hasn't given you something, don't desire this. What is in there? And what is cosmetic surgery? It's a desire to make yourself look a certain way. I want to look like a Korean K-pop star, a Korean movie star. That's the model right now, at least for Thailand. Or I want to look younger than I am. So you have a 50-year-old actress who goes through Botox and all kinds of facial lifts and so on to look 20-year-old. Those of you who follow some of the entertainment news, entertainment business people do a lot of stuff to try and improve their looks. But some of you may not go through cosmetic surgery, but the questions would arise with other things like, how much makeup should you really use? How should you look after your skin? I told my students, and they got so frustrated with me. I said, if you want to have less wrinkles when you grow older, don't smile a lot and don't frown a lot. Keep a still face most of the time and you will have less wrinkles as you grow older. Because they asked me, how come, sir, you are this age but you have no wrinkles or very few wrinkles in your face? I said, because that's what I do. When you smile, when you frown, what happens to your skin? Come on, be honest. You stretch and so they start to remain stretched after that. Now, of course, high school students, they can't deal with this kind of logic. They're like, this teacher is just crazy. What God is talking about here is that He is the one who has created us. So whatever we do, whether it's worship, like the sanctuary and the Sabbath, or the making of images, or the use of sacrifices, even with the harvest and things like sorcery, that we are then playing in a world where it is God's right. And there's, of course, with human relationships. We don't have slaves today, so we don't talk about redeeming slaves. But prostitution is still very much alive today. And this is one thing. I think as long as the world exists in sin, prostitution will continue to exist. We have always found it easy to do this. The preservation of life is part of human rights. And so that would raise thoughts on things like abortion, euthanasia, and so on. And I'm not going to actually talk about that. But what we are supposed to do is to preserve life. And we must make personal conclusions about that. I was called at St. Paul's Church. A lady was dying from cancer and she was in really bad state. She had had brain tumors, relapsed again and again over 6 years. And finally, the hospitals had given up on her. And in America, they have halfway houses where a patient like that, is placed, and they basically pump the body with morphine to control the pain and wait for them to die. So the family calls me. They're all members of the church. I have 2 grown-up daughters and the husband. Pastor Fanwar, can you please come and pray for our mother to die? Man, I was like, don't you normally call a pastor to pray for healing? Pray for anointing? By the way, every anointing I've been involved with in church level, the person would die. The last anointing I ever got involved with was an elderly lady from my own church, in my denomination, and she was so much loved, people wanted, and so all the elders of the church, 20 of us, maybe that was overload, 20 of us went to the hospital and we anointed her with oil and we prayed for her so she can be restored to health. That day she was dead. And so after that, I've never been involved in anointing again. I think God put a different kind of electricity into my hand. But this family, they were serious about it. At first I thought, somebody's playing an April's Fool with me. So I went. Clearly my praying was not very effective. It took about 8 hours of prayer for her to actually fall asleep. Because she would drift in and out of consciousness. So when she was awake, I prayed for her, talked to her, and so on and so forth. It went on and on and on for about 8 hours before she finally slept. But that was a hard thing. And I kept asking myself, did I just do spiritual euthanasia? We think of euthanasia as something the doctors do, right? They pump you with chemical. But didn't I just do the exact same thing without any chemicals? You know? So that has always intrigued me from an ethical point of view. You know, what does it mean? But Leviticus is not so concerned about who you kill, it's concerned about what life you preserve. That is a principal function of being God's holy people. And this is why we treat everybody equally, because that's preserving life. We live in a world where inequality between men and women, young and old, is becoming worse. It's not getting better. Okay? And I think Leviticus is really good for the Christian church right now. There are Christian churches who still will not ordain women, who still treat women as second-class citizens even in the church. There are entire denominations that do that. Okay. We still have problems. Young people are, by and large, on the sideline. We look at them as workers for the church, but when it comes to decision making, you know, you have to be 50 years old before you can say how the church should be run. If you're 30, you're lucky, you're not wise enough. Especially in Asia, no gray hair, no wisdom. And so these issues, the world has become even more interested in them, and we have a sound biblical base for human rights that is not being used by Christianity. What a waste. We don't have slavery today, but we do have human trafficking. It's a huge, big problem. Where are the churches talking about human trafficking? Or going out to help change laws against human trafficking? Where are the Christians doing this? Most of it is being done by secular organizations. We are so busy worshiping on Sunday or Saturday, we don't have time for humanity. That's not Leviticus. That's not being holy. Being holy is that we take care of God's people, and God's people are not just in the church. God's people are all over this planet. There are Christians who are praying so hard, they even detach from the world so they can pray harder for Jesus to come back. But Revelation says before Jesus comes back, there must be the great tribulation. There must be the 7 plagues. The world will go into an awful state. Okay, why were you praying for that? Okay. Anyway, they do that. They don't have time to really work with society. Okay. When they do work with people, it is always with a missiological intention. We want to convert them. We never think of helping people simply because they are people who need our help. And so as Christians, we'll often go out to another country. We call them mission trips, and the main purpose is that we can add them to our boats. And then they go to Thailand and discover it doesn't work. No matter how many mission trips you make, no matter what you do, Thai people are like, very nice, listening to you, sounds good, bye-bye. Nothing changes. Pastor Wei Siang was arguing with me yesterday, or debating with me about where it's easier to evangelize, Malaysia or Thailand. Well, look at the stats. Malaysia has a Christian population of 8.9%, Thailand 1%. And Christianity has been in Thailand over 300 years. Thai religion is completely resistant to religious change. And Christians get excited because Thai people will not disagree with you. So you come, you preach the gospel with them, they will say, yes, very nice, very good. Will you become a Christian? They will say yes. But foreigners don't realize that in Thai, yes can mean no and no can mean yes. And you can say no yes and yes no at the same time. And the missionaries are patting themselves in the back and you know, and they're gone, and what happened? Nothing happened, nothing changed. And I really got this now working at this school. 90% of my kids are Buddhists, very secular Buddhists. Most Thai people today are secular Buddhists. And one of them said this to me, he said, sir, being a Christian is difficult. You have to do so many things. I'm like, what are you talking about? Christianity projects itself as the religion of grace. And we claim that the other religions of the world, including Buddhism, are based on works. He said, look here, you have to go to church, you have to give money, you have to sing song, you have to do this and do that. I'm a Buddhist, I don't have to do anything. And that is literally true. I have students who have not been to the temple for over a year. I ask them, how many times have you gone to the temple? Most of them, maybe 2 or 3 times a year at most. They are not required to go. Theravada Buddhism, which pervades Southeast Asia and has its real stronghold in Thailand, does not have any prescriptions, religious prescriptions. It has only 5 rules of life. Don't drink, don't steal, don't commit adultery, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't tell you how often you should go to the temple, and when you should go to the temple, and how much tambun you should do, and how much food you should give to the monks. It tells you nothing. You do whatever you like. If you want to give this much, that's your choice. If you want to give this much, that's your choice. Christian churches, 10% plus. Sounds like bad, isn't it? Or GST or whatever. And so to countries like Thailand, Christianity doesn't make sense. You say you're saved by grace, but then you tell me I've got to do all these things. What they do understand, appropriate behavior in the presence of the king. And this is where I have targeted my teaching. They know instinctively how you must act when you are in front of royalty. And I'm like, think of God as king. That's what it means. You should see what they do when the king's birthday comes around. People who get the opportunity to assemble at the royal court to attend that wedding ceremony will spend thousands of baht buying the newest Thai silk clothes to wear for that one time occasion, and they cannot wear it again, ever. Oh yes. For foreigners, it's like, what's wrong with you? But it's a great tool for teaching holiness. Because they believe that the presence of the king changes the aura of the people and everything around, and so we must respond accordingly. How much more God? Now God knows we are not smart enough, we are sheep after all. We're not smart enough to know what it means to be holy. So He gives us this abundance of instructions so that we will know, oh, so that's what it means. Do you know that if a princess is sitting here in front of you, your head cannot be over her head? And this is why when the movement around royal family is always on your knees. Because you cannot do that. You cannot talk to royalty unless royalty talks to you. You cannot say, hello sir, it's not like England. It's a whole lot different. You cannot move in front of royalty. You have to, if you're sitting in that birthday celebration, you have to sit absolutely quiet. You cannot bring a mobile phone in there, you cannot bring your house keys in there. They will confiscate everything. Okay? And you cannot just walk into the palace, they will shoot you down. There are appointed times, just like with the sanctuary, there are appointed times when you can do that safely. So the laws protect the people from the soldiers who are going to shoot them. When the royal family is moving, the rest of the traffic must stop. And Thai people consider it one of the greatest privileges in life if one of their children gets an appointment to be a courtier in the royal court to serve the king. And they do not get paid. Serving the king is the honor. Think about that. Countries that have lost royalty concepts find it very hard to understand this. When I teach biblical concepts from this point of view, the Thai students find it easier to grasp. Oh, that's what it is. That's what God is. And so God helps us. He doesn't want us exposed unnecessarily. Okay, summary. Primary issues of Leviticus. Israel is God's chosen people. They are the redeemed recipients of grace. Yahweh lives among His redeemed people, but who are still in sin. So Yahweh is holy, and Israel is therefore expected to be holy like He is. Israel does not know how to be holy, so God tells them what this means. Holiness pervades every facet of life. And that's why you have, the instructions on every area of life. Okay. Israel's holiness is on two fronts. On the one hand, it's a status. Okay, it's like saying you are the royal family. So holiness, redemption grants this holy status. But God's proximity, like the royal family in Thailand, demands a holiness lifestyle. But since we don't know how to perform that holiness lifestyle or how to produce it, God helps us by giving us all the instructions. If we are not the holy people of God, these instructions will not be given. They do not apply to people who are not in the covenant. Read Exodus 20. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Therefore you will not have other gods, you will not take my name in vain, you will not make images, you will remember my Sabbath, you will honor your parents, you will not kill or steal or commit adultery or desire things that are not yours. Those words have no meaning without that preface. And in Judaism, the first commandment is those words, I am the Lord your God. Not, you should have no other gods. Christianity took the preface out as if it's not part. So first you have to be born in order to be Malaysian. Come back to that analogy. But then you have to learn what that means to be Malaysian, right? As a 1-year-old, do you know what it means to be Malaysian? How to treat the flag, how to talk to other people, which side of the road to drive in. No, you don't know. You learn that as you grow. Now, I was not born Malaysian, so I have to learn a different thing, right? That's how to be Indian. Well, I was not very good, that's why I'm not there anymore. If the kingdom of God is not appealing to you, migrate. But there's only one other kingdom, that is Karen, so sorry, not much place to go. So people who do not like their own country in our geopolitical climate, they migrate, right? But when you migrate to that other country, you have to learn things about that country. Most countries now require you to pass an exam before you get citizenship. Okay? And they test you if you know anything about the country, if you know about its government, if you know about its history, and so on and so forth. Does Malaysia do that if somebody, for a chance, obtains citizenship? Do you have to do an exam? An interview? What kinds of questions would they ask? Okay, so it's current affairs. They don't ask historical questions. In the American citizenship exam, they ask historical affairs as well as current ones. You have to understand the Constitution. You have to be able to explain how the government functions. You have to know the history, who was the first president, who was the 23rd president, and so on and so forth. They actually study like they do for SAT. I know because my daughter had to go through it. And there's an oral part to the exam, like the interview. There's also a written part to the exam. And then when you pass all that, then you are sworn in. You know, it's a beautiful ceremony, by the way. It's quite pompous. I attended one. You become an American now. But my daughter still also did. That's the thing about it. You can change citizenship, you cannot change nature. And what God is trying to do with this whole complex is to change our nature. To make sinful humans actually become holy like He is. This dual concept is foundational to every New Testament teaching. Whether you talk about grace, faith, grace and works, faith and work, all those questions that were raised in the writings of Paul, and so on, all of it was founded on one platform, this dual concept that Leviticus introduces to us. That we are God's holy people, and we must live holy lives that is compatible with that status. I know Alex is happy, because he's getting closer and closer to me. I think this is they realizing that the basketball thing didn't work with me. Okay? So, are you holy?
Yes.
Is your lifestyle holy? I'm glad for some honesty. Lifestyle is something we learn, like everything else in life. But status is something we are given. And so we are God's holy people, and we attempt to follow the instructions of God in order that we may also match it with the holy lifestyle. The holy lifestyle does not dictate the status, it's the status that dictates the lifestyle. So we first become holy, and then we learn slowly as we go along to actually be holy. And I believe that when Jesus comes back, his people will have reached that synchronicity between status and lifestyle. We will actually be what he has called us to be. So don't break your head right now if your lifestyle is not holy enough, or even a little bit holy. It's okay. We are still holy regardless of what our lifestyle is, where our lifestyle is at. Those of you who are still enjoying the dead meat, go ahead and enjoy the dead meat, but hopefully you move. Those of you who are struggling with time factors and relationship factors, no, they will not be perfect in that sense. Okay. But we are perfect in the sense that we are the sons and daughters of God. And it does not appear what we shall be, but what we already are. And one day we will learn fully how to really look like the sons and daughters of God, so that even Satan cannot accuse anymore. So Leviticus is a wonderful book because God did not leave this to chance. He actually helps us so that we can seek to achieve it. And if we are honest about Scripture, then we have to be honest with the book. Okay. So whatever changes we make in our lives, it is because we already are God's holy people. And so we're like, we want to get closer to God. We want to be more like Him. These are His expectations, so why not pursue them? And I think that's probably the way that we should approach it. Okay, I think we have some questions. Yeah, I have here. Let me answer the easiest one. Is eating unclean food mean you will not be saved? No, of course not. You are not saved because of what you eat. You eat clean because you are saved. But holiness is also a lifestyle, so it will keep developing. Okay? The real question is, which direction are we moving? Okay? God is not measuring our nutritional habits. He's measuring our holiness habits. Okay? Even though food is given a bit of attention here, that's because of the struggles that Israel had. Okay? But I think, like everything in life, if you really love your Father in heaven, then you move in that direction. That's the real question. You are already saved. If you're not saved, these laws don't even matter. Forget, eat everything. Everything that moves and crawls, like the Hong Kong people. Nothing matters. Okay, this one we sort of touched yesterday, but we just recap it. Why is Leviticus placed as third book in Leviticus, in Torah? Actually, not third book, it's the center of Torah. It's the middle of the Torah. And precisely because of its subject, its dominant subject matter is holiness. So that's at the center. And you notice some of the history around it, it's not very holy. The Israelites make mistakes, the patriarchs make mistakes, and so on, but they are all God's holy people. And that's in the center. What is the difference between desire and covet? In English, not much. I'm not sure this question is linguistic or theological. The Hebrew word is closest to the modern English word desire. Covet in English has a negative connotation already. The word desire does not have in English negative connotation. Okay. I desire to do my best. You know, if you're a student, you can say that. Yeah, but it didn't list that. It says what is not yours. Okay, do not covet your neighbor's wife. Do not covet your neighbor's donkey. Today it would be do not covet your neighbor's Lamborghini. God was writing that today. There's a way to deal with desire. I had found a personal solution. I love the supercars, but I know I cannot afford them. And I don't want to be thinking about, oh, I wish I could own a Lamborghini and drive around. So I buy a model Lamborghini. Put that on the shelf, and you can look at it, and I can say with all honesty and a straight face, I own a Lamborghini. I did this to my students, and they thought, no, that's not possible. So I brought my cars to class one day, demonstration. Oh, really, sir? You really have a Lamborghini? Yes, I have a Lamborghini. I have a Lamborghini, I have a Ferrari, I have a Porsche, I even have the, what's that? Yeah, I have all kinds of things. I collect cars, basically. But I buy these models that I know I definitely can never afford, never buy. You know, I have a BMW Z4, you know, and all those fancy cars. And they actually work. You can open the doors, you can pull the wheel, and it will run. The Ferrari even makes some, you know. You can manipulate the steering a little bit, a little toy. Of course, when I took the class, I had a very strict instruction: see but not touch. This is holy property, you cannot touch. Now, the Hebrew word desire is kind of generic, like the English word desire. It could mean anything. But it drives at things that do not belong to you and that God has not given you. And I think that's where it is. So in that sense, not too much. How do you reconcile the food recommended, not edible in Leviticus with the Acts? Okay, I know that this will come up. It's in more than one question. In Acts chapter 10, there is a vision that Peter had that involved food. But you need to read the whole chapter. Don't stop with the vision. Read Peter's explanation of the vision. It was not about food. What was the vision about? About missions. Peter discovered that he was about to be sent by God among the Gentiles. And the Jews had made the Gentiles an unclean race. And the early apostles all wrestled with this question. Until Paul came around, we all believed should restrict it to the Jews. And then he has this vision, and God says to him, I have made whatever I have declared clean, you cannot say it's unclean. And then there was a knock at the door, and these Gentile people were standing there. Please come to Cornelius' house. Supposed to go to the Gentile. Do you know how Jews reacted? If they were in the Gentile house, they'd have to come home and go through a full days of ritual cleansing before they can go back to the temple. It would contaminate them. That's how they saw. So God used something that Peter understood. Peter said, God, I've never eaten anything unclean. And you can almost see God smiling. I'm not talking about food, you crazy guy. I'm telling you to go to the Gentiles whom you consider so unclean that you won't even eat at the same table with them. And then Peter went and came back to Jerusalem. He faced so many arrows from this holy church. They're like, who asked you to go to the Gentiles? Don't you know that makes unclean? They did that to Jesus too, right? If this man is a prophet, how come he has sinners as his friends? How come he eats in the house of tax collectors? So they applied the clean, unclean rule from the food to the humans. And so God used what they knew to take them to where they should be. By the way, a very good teaching technique. Okay, take what people know and then turn it upside down, and Peter is like, so now I have to go to Gentiles, right? Peter did not conclude that he had to eat unclean food. And we know this because 5 chapters later we have the Jerusalem conference, where they debated circumcision, but in the minutes that came out, it was mostly about food. And it clearly says that do not eat blood or anything that is dead, and then about adultery, about food preferred to idols, and so on. It didn't even touch in the minutes of the Jerusalem Council. They didn't even say anything about circumcision, not directly. So we know that the first church council reaffirmed the food laws of Leviticus. So clearly, chapter 10 is dealing with quite something very different.
But there's one part specifically saying you cannot eat blood and twisted neck people. You can eat all others.
Yeah, but you have to explain them against the big picture. See, this is the way you must learn how to deal with the Bible. There are difficult texts, okay, everywhere. There are text that will challenge what we think we know. But when you do that, when you encounter, this is actually one of them, and Pastor Lee is right. When you do that, you need to place that text against the bigger backdrop on that subject, all the other texts dealing with it, and then try to come to a conclusion. Don't try to come to a conclusion from that one text, because otherwise you will generalize. Think about what we do with nationalities. You know, we meet one Malaysian, and that Malaysian acts a certain way, and what do we say? All Malaysians are like that. Really? How many Malaysians do you actually know? There are 44 million Malaysians. I don't know even 100. How can I say all Malaysians are like that? But we do that all the time, don't we? And we do that with the Bible also, by the way. We see that one text and we say, oh, it must mean this. But if you put it against a big picture with all the other texts on that subject, what does it really mean? Then you can come to a fuller understanding of what it means. Okay, it is a problem text. So my challenge to you is go back and look at against the background. Find all the other texts dealing with similar subject. Okay, food and death and killing and so on, and see what comes out. And I think that that answer will be better than for me to just try and answer at the moment. Yeah, sorry, I did that already. This one is very long. Let me try and back up the smaller ones. If one owns a business that runs on Sabbath, but is being run by the workers or staff, is this acceptable to God? If you were a Jew, you'd say yes. If you go to Jerusalem, anybody been to Jerusalem here? If you live in the Orthodox Jewish quarter, okay, they have hotels. Some of the best hotels are there. But they also keep Shabbat. They're very strict about Shabbat. Okay. And my first thought was, am I going to get breakfast or not tomorrow, on Friday? Okay. I was in one of the resorts in Galilee, and on Friday around 4 o'clock, they started rushing us. You know, dinner was put out early. They started telling us, please eat soon. We have to go for Shabbat. And my thought was, is there breakfast on Sabbath morning? Came down, no, there was breakfast. But the first thing I noticed is that the language had changed. I couldn't hear any Hebrew, only Russian. That's how the Jews solve their problems today. Okay? They keep the Sabbath, and the Russians work. Lifts. The hotel I stayed in was about 20 stories high. They put the lift, it's called a Sabbath lift, a Shabbat lift. They put the lift on auto. So what it does is it moves floor to floor, stops, opens the door for a few minutes. You cannot do anything. You can press the buttons, nothing works. Then it moves to the next floor, and then it comes back down. You just wait your turn. Hopefully you didn't get a room in the 20th floor, because that would be a long wait to get down for breakfast. But breakfast is there, and it's all Russian. You get a Russian breakfast on Sabbath, not a Jewish one. So the Jews have been very clever at dealing with this dichotomy. Christians are not always as smart. We're too literalistic about it. Now, if you really run a business, say like a hotel, can you really shut it down on Sabbath? When you have a bunch of guests? Of course not. That would be very inhumane. You know, human rights. Treat the foreigners in your midst as if they're a family. But find some wisdom like the Jews. You know, now is it the right answer? Probably not. But I think sometimes in the exercise of holiness, we need to exercise some wisdom as well. God is not treating us as robots. But if He was treating us robots, so many questions. Should I drive on Sabbath? How do I get to church if I live 20 kilometers away from church? Should I walk? Well, the rabbis had a rule called the Sabbath day's walk. Then they realized Sabbath day's walk, maybe they didn't get to synagogue. And so the rabbis did the next thing. They were really good at this. That's why they're the masters of the law. You cannot beat them. Legalistic Christians cannot compete with the rabbis. So they came up with another rule. Okay, send your servant, but this only worked for richer people, on Friday with some food and change of clothes at that Sabbath point. Then when you change your clothes and you have food, that's your house, then you can have another Sabbath day's journey from there. And so you can get infinite travel. But in our world, that's never going to work. So what do they do today? They drive their cars for Shabbat Vespers on Friday, just before sundown to the synagogue, and then walk back home. You can't drive your car back home. Everything in their house is on timer. So the food is in the oven, the timer comes on, the lights are turned on by timer, and so on and so forth. So it's quite interesting. You're not allowed to use any mechanical instrument when you are in Jewish quarters on Shabbat, even if you're a foreigner. So you can't carry cameras around, you can't use your mobile phone. When you have worship, you cannot use a microphone. No, and you cannot use a piano, keyboard, or whatever. The singing is entirely a cappella most of the time. Okay? So no matter how big the congregation, the rabbi has to cantillate his voice. He has to project his voice. You can hear me, right? I don't have to have this. I did that voice projection in class one day. The high school students thought, what did you just do? You know, what happened? There was some who was sleeping, they actually woke up. But, did you have a bad dream or something? It's a very intriguing thing. It's a very interesting thing. Life doesn't stop. However, if you get sick on Sabbath in Jerusalem, there's no hospital open for you. Oh no, wait. Don't feel so bad. They're smart people. The blessings of God haven't completely perished. It's the only modern country where doctors are still making house calls, and this is because of Shabbat. What they do is, the hospital is only on call services. You cannot go and check in. Pharmacies are on call, some pharmacies. And all the hotels have all the numbers. So you get sick. But because this happened to me, I got sick. I got a kidney stone attack on Sabbath day, Sabbath morning. I was supposed to sing for the VIP guy in the conference. Got sick. And, you know, being Asian, first thing is, can you recommend a hospital? The hotel people, no, there are no hospital. It's Shabbat, there's no hospital for you to go to. I said, so what am I supposed to do? Oh, don't worry, we'll call a doctor. The doctor came. She had a little box. She tested blood and urine, everything. She did all the chemical tests. Yes, you have kidney stone. Everything was done by the doctor. She examined you, gave the medicines that were needed. The best medicines for kidney stones are in Israel. I can tell you this for a fact. I've never had more effective medicine to pass kidney stones than the Israeli ones. Okay. And the Israeli doctors are today the best diagnostician in the world because of this, because of Shabbat. And then, of course, being a good, now I'm a Sabbath keeper too, right? But I'm not a Jewish Sabbath keeper. So I'm also being Asian, you know. So when she was finished with me, I thanked her for this thing. You know, I was like, how much to pay you? Sorry, I cannot take any money now. It's Shabbat. Really? No. They're smart people. No, never play with Jews. So I'm like, what do I do? I said, don't worry, I'll come back after sunset. I will check you again, then you can pay me. That was the best medical service I've ever had. And it was on a Sabbath. And she did it without breaking the Sabbath, but maintaining the laws about taking care of human life. It's a beautiful way to live. And that was, even though I've been a Sabbath keeper all my life, that was the best Sabbath I've ever had before or since then. It was the most peaceful, it was the most quiet, there was no sound of machines, no cars on the road, no buses running, no clicks of cameras. All you could hear were these cantillations of rabbis through the synagogues or listen to the voice of God. Because Jews believe this, that you must reduce everything on the Sabbath to the two essentials of life, God or your family. So everything is about God and family on Shabbat. And if you talk to a Jew, we look at this and say, wow, so much restriction. No, for them, it's the best day of the week. It's the happiest days of the week. It's the best thing to do. Because now, by doing all of that, now I have time for God and my family. No more other distractions. Only this two essential. And I came away from that with a totally different understanding of Shabbat than I ever had before. I realized that even my church, which keeps Sabbath, didn't have a quarter of the understanding that they had. No, they don't stop life. Life doesn't stop. but you find a way to stop. You know what the Hebrew word Shabbat means, right? No, it doesn't mean rest. No, it means stop. Like as you're driving the road, the red light comes on, what do you do? Stop. Stop. And the point that Judaism has learned after thousands of years of keeping Sabbath, the point is to stop. Yes, they found clever ways to, to keep their hotels running and to keep food on the tables for guests, but they stopped. I watched in that resort in a gallery all the Jewish workers hurrying from the resort around 5 p.m. so they could get home or get to synagogue before the sun actually set. Also on call. Everything is on call in Jerusalem, in the Jewish quarter. The other side of Jerusalem, so-called East Jerusalem, that's the Arab side. That one, nothing stops. Okay. But West Jerusalem, which is really Jewish and really dominated by Orthodox Jews, everything stops. I mean, literally and factually, everything stops. And you actually get time to breathe the air, to listen to the sound of your own lungs. Because there's no other sounds to listen anyhow. And being Gentiles, we cannot go into the synagogue anyway. So, it was an amazing way of combining modern reality with very ancient regulations that God gave. Okay. And we need to discover that wisdom. We think that in order to keep some of these laws, we have to get rid of something. But maybe we can find another way of how to make this happen. Yes, please.
How about the military? Because they're always attacked by Hamas.
You remember the 1973 Yom Kippur War? The Arabs thought they would do the really smart thing. Attack Israel on its holiest day, when everybody is expected to be in synagogue and to be fasting, etc., etc. Don't attack Jews on Yom Kippur. It's their holiest days. That's when they have the most power, because the holy is running through them in huge sources. 7 Arab nations attacked them on that Yom Kippur day, and all 7 of them had to run with their tails played between their legs. Now see, this is the thing about modern Jewish understanding of life. If life is threatened, then life takes precedence over some of this liturgical stuff that's happened. See, Jews have a greater understanding of law. Law doesn't stand on a straight line. Law stands in grades, which is similar to Leviticus. And life is always up here. So that has enabled the race to survive every pogrom, every Holocaust for 5,000 years. No race of people has been hounded and persecuted and driven underground as much as the Jews. But nobody has succeeded in getting rid of them. And most scholars believe that faith, that understanding, that adaptability of their faith, enables them to survive. Okay. I'm not a Jew. I will never be a Jew. But I have learned immensely how to live faith in the real world from them. Jews who live in the cities like New York and so on, they have a very interesting way of understanding Shabbat. Because the question is, what should I do on the Shabbat? Okay, after synagogue, what else to do? And they believe that you should do things that you cannot do during the week. So they actually use expressions like museum Jews. So I cannot go to the museum during the week, but on Shabbat, after synagogue, I can take my family through the museum, or take them to the park, or whatever. It's a really beautiful concept where they're trying to bring the modern world with ancient realities and found a way around it. Okay. I'm not saying that they have the perfect solution, but they certainly have more wisdom than we have obtained. They've been doing this for such a long time. Anyway. And I think that's what God expects from us. These laws were not meant to bind us down, to put us in a straitjacket so that we cannot move. No, they were actually meant to create freedom for us. Okay. And the prevalence of wisdom literature in the Old Testament tells us that that is equally important to God. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So worship, wisdom, knowledge, law, grace, legal requirements, all of them converge together. We tend to separate them, like somehow law and grace are incompatible. You know, like somehow Shabbat and running a hotel are incompatible. I have a friend, he's a Sabbath keeper in Bangkok, who owns a hotel. And people are always shooting him down because the hotel runs on, on Saturday it's still running. They're like, what kind of Sabbath keeper are you? You're running a hotel. You can't shut down a hotel. You can't shut down a... There are some businesses that you can shut down for Shabbat, right? But there are some that you can't. It becomes an inhumane thing. Hospital is one of them. But I think the Jewish way is more interesting. Have the doctors go to you in this sick on Shabbat instead of you go to them. Okay. It made them better doctors. I could have flown out of, you can't fly out of Jerusalem, but I could have gone to Tel Aviv before sundown and take a flight. I could actually have done that. Go to the Arab side and cross over that way. No. I could have done that and not have to pay her. You know what I mean? She's taking a big risk to come back nearly 12 hours later to collect her payment and then giving me that additional service of a follow-up visitation that I did not ask. Think about the implications of that. They've gone way beyond help. Yeah, the hospital may not be open unless it's an absolute emergency, like an accident or something, But I've gotten better treatment than I've had in any hospital. Come on. You know how hospitals work, modern hospitals. You go to a specialist, see a doctor, he does this and that, 5 minutes, you're gone, okay, here's the medicine, take. She was with me, she had to conduct all those tests, urine, blood, and everything to make sure that it was kidney stone. No pharmacist working with her, no chemist, nothing. The doctor did everything. So their doctors are of a different breed. Because of Shabbat. The only reason why we are that way. So they've learned. It took them a long time. It took them a few thousand years. So let's be nice to ourselves. It took them a few thousand years to learn that the laws were meant to enhance life, not to make it contrary, not to make it difficult. It took the Jews a few thousand years, let's be nice, because we are only a few, we have much shorter time frame. But the bigger concern, I think, for us is to understand the elements of holiness and how that applies. Okay, one last question. This is a long question. This has more to do with God's choice. So it's not directly Leviticus, but I'd like to tackle it. Why God chose Israel and not somebody else? Israel didn't really work out so well. Why didn't He just change and pick somebody else? What was the leading reason for God choosing Israel? Because of a promise He made to Abraham. Nothing to do with the condition of Israel. He even told them, not because you were greater or bigger or more important than other nations that I chose you, because I'm keeping a promise I made to your ancestors. Deuteronomy chapter 7. Go back and read that. The Bible actually gives us a reason why. The other part of the question is, why didn't God just, they're so bad. 40 years in the desert, they were bad, and then 300 years during the Judges period, they were worse. Why didn't God just snap His finger? Well, push the question back. Why didn't God do that with Adam? Here's the thing about God. What is the most common denominator in the Bible about God's relationship to us? He is our Father. That's the most common denominator. How many fathers in this room? Please raise your hands. That's a noble thing, even in today's world. How many of you fathers would do that if you had a really naughty child? Snap your finger, get out of the way, and produce another one. No, but honestly, let's suppose that you can still produce. don't be so sure. My grandfather was 70 years old when he married a 17-year-old woman and they still got a son. So don't, life is always possible. But how many fathers would even contemplate that option? So if God is truly our Father, and Luke says that Adam was son of God, he's never going to contemplate that option. He's going to take the harder route. And that is, let's try and fix this problem. I can't get rid of them. You are mine. If you don't believe me, read Hosea chapter 11. Okay. How can I give you up, O Israel? I cannot. And then he adds this phrase, I am God, not man. He's suggesting that humans could. Isaiah 49 says, your mother and your father will forsake you, but I, the Lord, will not forsake you. And we've seen in our history that human parents do forsake their children. Okay. Throw them in the garbage bin. Still happens in India. Sell them for money. There was a big case in Thailand where a mother has used her 5-year-old daughter as a sex worker to make money. That is blew my mind. We read these stories all the time. They happen. Those people who are following news in India, the big thing happening in India is rape stories. They are coming out in like mushroom all over the country. It's become a huge issue. And yet God says, it's still mine. I don't like what you're doing. You are awful. But you're mine, so I'm going to persist. I'm going to help you. I'm going to try. I will even threaten you with harem if nothing else works. But I'm not going to give you up until it's not possible to keep it. Okay. I think I've answered most of the questions I have. Some of them are repetitions. So thank you very much. You've been patient. There's a lot of data here. Please go back and study the book again with some of this background and see what else you can learn. Thank you.